Video games are truly special. I've always thought this way. Unlike reading a book, listening to music, or watching a movie, the tactility of video games as a hobby has always stuck with me. Just this idea that through picking up a controller, you can play and experience so many varied ideas and stories, so many experiences, just neatly packaged into one. In theory, it's sensory overloading. In execution, it's marvellous. And it's why, as a child, I was in love with video games more than anything else, really. Still am nowadays, but my adult life and the plethora of priorities has me scattershot and inconsistent about keeping up with the medium. Nevertheless, I love it. And with that came a love for Sonic games in particular. It's hard for me not to love the series from my personal perspective. The idea of blitzing through levels as fast as possible, decimating enemies and bosses, exploring all these wonderful, genuinely imaginative locations at supersonic speeds with a colourful cast of characters is, honest to God, extremely appealing to me. To play a Sonic game is to be on vacation, except Sonic is lugging you around at the speed of sound while you witness wild antics, listen to some genuinely banging music, or you sit back and view a story with so much heart to it. You're a tourist in a fascinating, imaginative world, and you've got the front row seat of the experience. This series really encapsulates everything sensory that I love about games. To take these individual sensory aspects and mesh them together so cohesively, albeit never consistently, to create something genuinely fun and vibrant and intriguing at times. Something entirely unique every time. And that's why I love one particular game out of them all in this series. Shadow the Hedgehog. If you've been on the internet, you're probably already familiar with this game, but in short, Shadow the Hedgehog was a spin-off game featuring Sonic the Hedgehog's rival, Shadow. The game revolves around the titular hedgehog, on a quest to find out the truth about himself. Having lost his memory and with no clue on what his past pertains after events of earlier games, he's contacted by an alien known as Black Doom, who beckons the hedgehog to gather the 7 Chaos Emeralds and bring them to him, as promised. Disappearing in a flash, Shadow is left with no choice but to hunt down the emeralds, believing that they're the key to his past. Will he be a hero and save the day, stop Black Doom? Will he choose his own path? Or will he assist the alien in the conquest of mankind? It's up to you, because this is a Sonic game with multiple paths, multiple options. Hero or villain? You decide. The game at the time was viewed with a fairly mixed reception. To this day, it still persists, seen as such by some. Some decry the tonal shift, some decry the slower speed, some find the edginess to be forced or hammy, with some criticism especially directed at the way the game presents and uses its multiple pathway structure. All in all, the game was received with mixed feelings, though over time it's come to be appreciated for its qualities, with it being beholden to the standard of Sonic game reception. If many people dislike it, it will naturally in tow have a quadrant of people who shower it in adoration. I'm most likely one of those people. Personally for me, this is one of my all-time favourite games, and I want to discuss it. I want to go over this game, how it makes me feel, and the genuinely interesting intricacies and aspects to it, to me, make it stick out in my mind. In this video, I want to talk about why I love this game so much. I want to show you why I love Shadow the Hedgehog, what I like, what I don't like, and generally why I believe this game appeals to people so much. I want to share with you all how I feel about the game, the aspects I have come to appreciate more about it, and look back, retrospectively. This video is not to convince you that this game is good, but it's also not here to convince you that this game is bad. It's to show you this game in its entirety, and how it's honestly just a lot more interesting than people give credit for. Sit back and get comfy as we take a dive into the game, the world of Shadow the Hedgehog. Before we get right into Shadow as a game, there's a few things we must establish. From the perspective of someone who isn't a Sonic fan, you may have already heard quite a lot about this game. Or maybe you've looked at it from a glance and you thought that it's just an odd looking title anyway. Perhaps as a Sonic fan, you've already, perhaps subconsciously, considered this game an outlier. Which, fair enough. But here's an interesting question for you. How do you define a Sonic game, exactly? From my own observations, the games follow a general list of traits. Sonic as the protagonist. The series began with him as the protagonist, thus you expect the blue blur to be the centre focus for the most part. Colourful levels with a wide range of locales. Grassy lands, hills full of flora and fauna, labyrinthian ancient ruins, man-made factories, designed by Eggman, the main antagonist. Not all of these types of levels are within the games, there is some variation, but most games accumulate one or two of these tropes, usually for the sake of keeping things familiar, while also allowing the new additions to feel fresh accordingly. A wide variety of supporting characters, usually either playable or in crucial roles within the stories of the games. Early games such as Sonic 2 had Miles Tails Prower, Sonic's best friend. Sonic 3 and Knuckles had the rival turned friend at the end, Knuckles. Later games such as Sonic Heroes emphasised this more, with the game consisting of 4 teams, 4 campaigns that play individually different in terms of level difficulty and layout. And above all else, a concise story. From the very first game to even nowadays as of this video with Sonic Frontiers, the games have a mostly concise story, refusing to deviate massively and keeping itself simple but elaborate enough. Later games tend to become looser with this, creating plot lines that carry over into other games or have relevancy later, but overall, the games have a story that you can at least recognise to some extent. Which is where Shadow the Hedgehog immediately becomes noticeable, because for the most part this is, by definition, an extremely atypical game in the series. Similar, yet different enough. This is a game in the series where Sonic isn't the playable protagonist, the primary protagonist, where there's a wide variety of characters but their presence in your playthrough is entirely dependent on the actions that you do. The levels that you visit don't really follow the usual tropes and are also dependent on the choices you make and the paths you pursue, and the story changes depending on what path you actually want to go on. Very atypical. Upon reveal, and to the months leading up to the game's release, its atypicality was immediately evident to the masses. Outlets were curious about the title, interviewing those involved with the game's development quite a lot, while elsewhere some fans expressed their concerns at the game. In other instances, the game's darker tone was shrugged off entirely. Overall, the game received an incredibly mixed reception at the time from fans and reviewers alike, of which to this day, feelings about the game still remain a shuffle of enjoyment and absolute disdain. But in spite of the game being so mixed in its reception, it's never really stopped being interesting to the masses. See, with a game this mixed in its own reception, you'd expect most people to forget about it, but no, people didn't. Over time, this game would repeatedly crop up in some mimetic fashion, ranging from the bizarrely well-made shadow statue they unveiled back when the game was first seen, I want this by the way, to the damn 4th Chaos Emerald, Ow the Edge, hell, even the Snapcube fandub, which is one of the funniest fucking things I've ever seen. This game has never stopped being interesting to people, in spite of its reception, and in tandem, people have grown to appreciate it more over time. But to me this game was always genuinely fascinating to me. As a kid, I knew it wasn't like the other Sonic games I had in my collection, but I loved it nonetheless. It was something darker, something a little more mature, something with a very unique feel, and I found myself attracted to playing it a lot. I wasn't very good at the game when I was a kid, so it remained an enigma to me. So when I would make more progress on it, I felt like I was on top of the damn world. I have a lot of memories of this game, actually, as you can probably tell, lying on the living room couch when I was ill as a kid, off from school, holding the controller firmly in my hands as I'm battling not only a cold, but the aliens on board the Black Comet for the first time, both amazed and terrified. Distant lights with the light of a lamppost outside seeping into my windows, illuminating my dark room, the hum of a CRT and the whir on my PlayStation 2, keeping me company as I played with stopless all the way to Lava Shelter. Friday nights after a rough school week where I'd somehow stumble upon a part of the game I never played before up until then. My feelings of amazement when I saw more of the genuinely beautiful CGI cutscenes in this game, always so fascinated by them. Getting to parts in the story, the past felt so good back then. It was a cozy game to me in my younger years, which is why now I want to express all of that with you, the viewer. There's so much more to this game than just its prickly, edgy exterior, and I want to show you that. I want to share my thoughts, my feelings, memories with you, and let you see this game in a perspective, a way that you might not have considered before, or perhaps I'm vocalizing how you feel. So how about we begin with the simple steps? How exactly did we get to Shadow having his own game and wielding a Glock? Who is Shadow, and what is this game about exactly? To understand that, you must understand how we got here. You must understand that Shadow the Hedgehog follows up from plot points, threads introduced in Sonic Heroes and Sonic Adventure 2. Let's give a brief summary of these. In Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow is introduced as a mysterious dark hedgehog who's been running amok with Gun trying to capture him. Over time, it's revealed that 50 years prior to the events of the game, Shadow was created aboard the space colony Ark as a part of Project Shadow, an effort by humanity to achieve the ultimate goal of immortality. Led by the grandfather of series antagonist Eggman, Gerald Robotnik, he initially refused to be a part of it until he realised that he could use the project as a way to cure his terminally ill granddaughter, Maria. Shadow and Maria were incredibly close, but Shadow's life aboard the Ark ended when Gun raided the Ark, killing most of the people on board, including Maria in the process, who was able to get Shadow jettisoned down to Earth to safety in her final moments. Ultimately, Gerald would be imprisoned, blamed for the Gun raid, executed, and Shadow would be placed in stasis. After being rediscovered and reawakened by Eggman 50 years later in the present day, Shadow works with the former and Rouge the Bat for the majority of the game for the sake of world conquest, promising revenge on humanity in due part to Maria's death, his memories and mind having been altered by Gerald. In the final story, however, it's revealed that Gerald, stricken mad with grief over the death of Maria, reprogrammed the Ark to collide into Earth and kill everyone in the process once it had all 7 Chaos Emeralds inserted into its primary defense weapon, the Eclipse Cannon. Fortunately, Shadow, having overcome the brainwashing, the programming by Gerald, with the help of Amy Rose, realised that Maria's last wishes were for him to bring hope to humanity, to give everyone a chance. He ends up working with Sonic and company to prevent the Ark from reaching the planet below. Sonic and Shadow are ultimately successful with averting the crisis, at the cost of Shadow's life as he plummets to the planet below, assumed dead. In the next game, Sonic Heroes, Shadow is revealed to have been recovered by Eggman, who placed him in stasis once more. Rouge, having been after Eggman's secret treasure, is shocked upon seeing him, although the pair are interrupted as one of Eggman's bots, E123 Omega, reactivates with the intent of destroying all Eggman robots and Eggman himself. While aiming at Shadow, Curious, managing to stop Shadow and Omega from killing each other, she gets the two to calm down, before realising their intents. Omega wants revenge on Eggman for being sealed away, and Shadow remembers nothing about who he is, what happened in the previous game, how he got to being in one of Eggman's bases. Deciding that their interests align, the three form Team Dark, pursuing Eggman throughout the story. As Shadow and company pursue the Doctor, the pursuit to find out the truth about who Shadow really is remains a crucial mystery. At one point, the Doctor insists that Shadow has no memory, and then Shadow witnesses the broken remains of a Shadow android after fighting the Doctor at the bullet station, raising questions on if the Shadow we're playing as is even the real one. Later, Team Dark encounters Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, who strangely don't seem too surprised at Shadow being alive, although Shadow is perplexed at Sonic, remarking that he looks like his twin.
What was with that hedgehog that looked like my twin?
Shadow continues to ponder. By the midway point of the game, Shadow queries Omega to identify if the Eggman they've been encountering is even real, although they fight the latter nonetheless. Team Dark pursues the Doctor still, Shadow dedicating himself to doing so even if he isn't real. Ultimately, Team Dark defeats the Doctor. Rouge, still trying to find Eggman's secret treasure, ends up coming across hundreds if not thousands of Shadow androids, raising the question on what Shadow is, Rouge believing Shadow's most likely a robot. Nonchalantly, Omega replies, "You know about cloning, the original must exist somewhere." Shadow, outside, eventually tags along with Rouge. Later, all teams band together to defeat Neo Metal Sonic, who had been impersonating Eggman all along. Shadow and Omega are last seen left cradling the defeated Metal Sonic. Shadow the Hedgehog immediately continues off from the mystery surrounding who Shadow is. Having time to himself, he contemplates who he is, trying to figure out what the name Maria means to him, only knowing that he had a connection to this person, and now she's now gone. His amnesia surrounding the events of his past remains in place. As he reminisces, the nearby city of Westopolis begins to be invaded by a race of aliens known as the Black Arms, who seem hell-bent on destruction. Shadow initially turns to leave, finding little time to care about the plight of the humans nearby, until a voice stops him in place. Turning back, he's greeted by an alien known as Black Doom, who beckons him that the promised time, quote-unquote, is near, to bring him the 7 Chaos Emeralds, as promised. Confused at the alien's knowledge of him, the words being spoken, he tries to ask more, but Black Doom quickly leaves. Stunned at the indication that there's someone else who knows about him, Shadow summarizes that the only way to really get the truth to his past is to acquire the emeralds. Shadow then sets off towards Westopolis, intent on discovering just who he is. Shadow rushes off down a broken highway as he plummets down into the carnage of Westopolis, musing over Black Doom's words as he drifts into the heart of the city. Buildings collapsing all around him as the Black Arms are seemingly intent on causing as much chaos as possible. Gun soldiers are attempting to fend off the swarm that are taking them on, although most are faltering due to the overwhelming amount of the alien invaders. Buildings are collapsing and lasers rain from the sky, decimating the surface of the earth, and now Shadow's here in the midst of all this. As Shadow progresses forward, he'll come across Sonic, who needs assistance in taking down the Black Arms. A bit further, Shadow acquires the first Chaos Emerald of the 7 he needs, wherein he meets with Black Doom's Eye, who beckons the Black Hedgehog to assist the Black Arms in decimating the human forces instead. However, if you choose not to do any of these, you can blitz through the city under siege at high speeds, and snag the second emerald for yourself. And this is where the game truly begins. Shadow the Hedgehog is a unique outlier in the Sonic series for its immediate changes in gameplay. Building somewhat from the objective-based mission system of Team Chaotix from Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog utilizes this formula to a far more defined extent. Instead of pursuing one objective, the player has the option to pursue one of 3 total objectives within each level, representing different moral alignments that you can side with: neutral, dark, and hero. The inclusion of these 3 different alignments makes playing the level you're in somewhat of a unique experience each time, as each objective within the level requires a certain level of finesse and attention to detail. There's no room to play mindlessly as you play these levels, with each mission being a unique experience each time. More on this in a second. But the 3 different possible objectives the player can undertake plays into the overall structure of the game, as by choosing one of these objectives, alignments, within the level and successfully completing it, you'll influence what level you'll be going to next. Shadow the Hedgehog lacks the linearity of the previous games, instead being a non-linear experience, where choosing one objective or the other allows you to traverse a wide complex of levels in a non-linear fashion, creating an experience where, in harkening on the hero or villain moniker the game mentions so much in its promo material, you can influence Shadow's story, where he goes next, how the plot develops. There has been a fair amount of criticism surrounding this system, in that certain plot points raised in one level can, by the end of the playthrough, be completely abandoned, but I don't entirely agree with this reasoning. Actually, I believe it's a little bit more clever than people really give credit for, as it plays into the chaotic, amnesic nature of who Shadow is, also taking into account that the Hedgehog's memory was somewhat altered by Gerald prior to the events of Sonic Adventure 2. The ambiguity of the character and the chaos ensuing between Gun, the Black Arms, and Eggman makes for a backdrop to a story where, by pursuing one alignment or the other and flip-flop in between, it replicates the struggle the character has to dig through his past, throwing some aspects away to justify others in their stead. That being said, I do think it's kind of clunky, but charmingly so. As for the objectives themselves, a lot of these objectives consist of target and elimination to eliminate a certain amount of enemies. In other missions, you may be after a singular armoured target that requires speed and damage in order to successfully destroy it before it gets out of your reach and the mission becomes unwinnable. Alternatively, you may be after a set amount of objects like rings or activating switches. With a lot of variation between all of these, While it's easy to suggest that the repetition can be frustrating, and at times it can be, yes, I feel the game does a perfectly fine enough job of creating variety within these missions, as you're never given a straight and narrow path to completing these right out of the gate. For a good majority of them, you have to be quite careful with your pathing, utilising checkpoints if you've missed anything, trying to avoid being damaged by other enemies, so on. One of the rule of thumbs I've always had with this game is that if you miss an enemy or two on a mission or a switch or whatever, check on the checkpoints to see if you've missed any checkpoints, as in you haven't activated a particular one. High chances are that by missing that, that's where your missing objective markers will be, what you need to do in order to finish the level. Whichever objective you choose regardless, it changes the way you play the level, with some levels becoming significantly shorter because of the objective you're undertaking, or some becoming significantly, proceedingly longer. God, as a kid I really liked this actually, because it felt rewarding to see that there was something behind the goal ring most times, that I was genuinely smart enough to find a secret or a new part of the level I'd never seen before. It feels immensely rewarding as a result, and it makes pursuing one path or the other through the objectives you want to take feel unique as an experience. In what other Sonic game are you outright encouraged to ignore the goal ring and reach for something higher than that? But let's discuss the actual meat of the gameplay itself, as it's no good describing everything else without discussing the obvious. I mean, look at the bloody cover art, you know what I'm talking about. Other than the objective-based mission system developed in detail from Sonic Heroes, Shadow plays very much like he did in that particular game, but the choice to pursue solely speed in the locales you visit is shaken up with the inclusion of a new mechanic: guns. While there have been guns in the series prior to this game, with characters such as Gamma from Sonic Adventure 1, the mechs of Tails and Eggman from Adventure 2, Shadow the Hedgehog just straight up abandons the pseudo-cartoony aspects of them, and allows the black blur to wield pretty much realistic to outright crazy guns. Everything from straight up pistols, alien cannons, bazookas, grenade launchers, to guns that rain all hellfire down on the unfortunate souls that are in your crosshairs. A common critique of this game is the generally unfitting nature of the guns. To see a cartoony hedgehog with a Glock is kind of ridiculous, but I think it works well enough. Actually, I'd go out of my way to say that using the guns is not only immensely satisfying, but tonally right for a character so angry and confused as Shadow. The feeling of just running around as Shadow as he somewhat auto-locks onto enemies nearby depending on the distance just feels really good, and there's something just so immensely satisfying about going fast and landing a well-timed shot from your gun to kill an enemy right in front of you just before you bump into them, keeping up the speed. I will admit, the aiming on it can be kind of finicky. It doesn't have a precise aim per se, this isn't Ratchet & Clank. More so locking onto enemies in this automatic way, the same kind of way that your homing attack would. But if you're patient and you let yourself learn the ins and outs of how it works exactly, it becomes quite fun. You can lock on somewhat using the shoulder buttons, you can strafe and do these cool little hops and flips and stuff, but I literally never found a use for it, personally. But it is there, in case you want to use it. The thing about this game and its mechanics is that while some routes do require you to eliminate a certain amount of enemies or use some destructive means to pursue the goal, you are not forced to use guns for any of them. Shadow has 3 other abilities. A quick chop that's alright for super up close enemies, still better on small fry, the homing attack, or the spin dash. If you absolutely hate the guns, you could honestly forego them and choose to pursue playing the game literally like Sonic Heroes. Or if you're fine with them, you could go full Rambo and decimate everything in your path. Or you could be insane and you could combine both, which is where the real fun comes in. If you choose to combine speed with not only the guns but your existing abilities, the game becomes open for you to merge the speed with the power you wield, which helps with the 2 gauges at the top of your screen, the red bar for evil actions, the blue bar for heroic ones. Dark actions, hero actions respectively. If you harm or eliminate enemies of whichever dark or hero faction, the gauge slowly builds up. While it's also there for score, if you build one of these up, you can use them. Building up the red gauge grants you the ability to use Chaos Blast. Chaos Blast grants you a blisteringly red form. rewarding you for doing evil and dark actions by granting you the ability to become a walking miniature nuke. Choosing to activate the ability results in a blisteringly red explosion coming from you that annihilates every living thing in its path indiscriminately.
We need assistance!
Also destroying the environment even more in the process. Even better yet, if you keep doing evil actions and building up the gauge as such, you have the chance to keep the carnage up, keep the gauge going, resulting in the ability becoming an addictive rush of how much you can wreck and destroy before the gauge dies down. Even better is that the gauge in use with the music motif playing in the background, encouraging you to be as chaotic as possible, allows for whatever weapon you're currently wielding to have infinite ammo, turning you not only into a living nuke, but also a walking tank of mass destruction. The pure fury of the ultimate lifeform sentencing anything that stands in his way to the deepest pits of hell and back, as chaos blasts and roasts whatever lays foolishly in its stead. Oh my god, it's satisfying. Incredibly satisfying. Meanwhile, on the opposite end, by doing heroic actions and filling up the blue gauge, you unlock the ability for some time, to use Shadow's signature move. Chaos Control, the ability to blitz through the levels at a majestic pace. Not only does it contain its own signature musical riff, like Chaos Blast, and the infinite ammo bonus I've mentioned, and the mechanic of refilling it as it depletes, using this gauge allows you to warp through the level at incredibly high speeds while the ever so satisfying theme of the ability plays.
Behold the ultimate power! Chaos!
I fucking love this ability because it's so damn satisfying to use. In fact, both are, really, but the utility of this one allows you to skip over parts of levels you might find frustrating or outright skip required fights to unlock certain doors. It also never stops and drops you over a bottomless pit, making it really convenient so that when you're playing and when you activate it, your attention should be on the game and not the spectacle of using the ability, because it will land you someplace in which you're able to stand on. Something I really adore about this ability too, in particular actually, is that in boss fights, since you can't really warp at high speeds around in really enclosed arena spaces, the utilization of the ability becomes significantly different, with the infinite ammo and ability to instead slow time down to a crawl, making the boss fights much easier to handle, somewhat. I'll talk about those in a second. Generally, I love that these abilities play into the alignment system of the game, even with how you never really get punished or denied a particular objective if you, for example, are on a dark mission involving eliminating those on the hero side and you kill dark mission enemies. I do like this, but I also kind of dislike it as well, just from a logical standpoint. Here's how I'd change it, let's say, if I could. Let's say if you chose Westopolis' hero alignment, in which you're hunting down members of the Black Arms with Sonic. If you've perhaps killed too many gun soldiers, the game would lock off the hero objective from you, with a voice line from Sonic announcing his displeasure at your actions, thus forcing you to consider how you play and being more careful, with the threat of being locked off to certain objectives always being there. The reason I propose such a proposition is due to the existence of weapons within the game that generally actually allow you to heal downed enemies. Not Black Arms though, with some objectives focusing around healing those kind of enemies. So why not develop from this and have a slightly sturdier morality system that plays into the fact that you've got weapons that can heal and weapons that can damage. However, I also like the game as is, so it's whatever, really. What I enjoyed the most about the gameplay is particularly the level of freedom you're given. You can switch between objectives at any time, meaning that you aren't pressured into one selection or the other. Playing a story route in Shadow is entirely of your own volition, your own choice, meaning that you can play however you wish, provided you adhere to the objective and alignment you've decided to choose, although even that's possible to change. Within that freedom also beholds how you traverse the levels. I've seen some criticisms over the years of how either Shadow with a gun doesn't really work for these kind of physics, or that the physics of Shadow himself often land you face first into a bottomless pit, but I tend to feel it's a little bit more complex than that. While I have had plenty of weird deaths, usually involving the bizarre collision in physics, I also feel that it plays to the game's advantage. Being able to blaze around at the speed of sound with a gun in your hand and an objective in your grasp really separates the people who play this game for 10 minutes and throw the controller down from the maniacs who adjust to the physics and are able to pull off some genuinely insane shit. Blazing around and jumping at the right time as you bump into certain environmental objects, sending you high up, skipping locked spring boxes, running at fast speeds and having enough momentum to carefully maneuver past the lack of platforms. This game is immensely satisfying to get a handle of. And you know what? It fits. Sonic is a character all about moving forward and going from one area to the next, but Shadow's a more methodical and unorthodox hog in comparison. So play like a madman and wield that gun in your hand. There's no judgment against playing creatively in a game like this. The more you play the levels, as you try to get the 10 endings minimum, the more you become experienced in this game's movement, taking leaps of faith and trusting your judgment as much as Shadow trusts himself to find the truth. And it's incredibly satisfying. By becoming experienced with the game like this, you can even maneuver around with the, admittedly, personally, not very useful spin dash, harkening back to Sonic's classic games, where a well-timed spin dash means you get an even more satisfying outcome. It can be the difference between life and death at times. I've never been for this argument where a game's wonky physics suddenly means it's the worst thing in the world. I mean, look at some of the stuff that you can pull off in Sonic Unleashed or Frontiers, especially Frontiers, with all the speedrunning tech involved there, which breaks the basic mechanics of the game to get to far off places. Sure, the argument isn't exactly one-to-one, but Shadow's physics being so bizarre at times means it can be really satisfying in return when you get a handle of how he actually plays, and start using it for your own fun and playing in an optimal sense rather than trying to play the game like something it isn't. For the record, I'm not defending the admittedly awkward physics at times, but rather suggesting that by working with the physics instead of against it and using it to become more nimble and precise with the game, you can generally make replaying the game and Where's Stoppolis 10 plus times over and over more interesting. Though personally, I've never really gotten bored of the game in that sense. Getting good at the physics of this game means that you can start cutting corners and optimize, prove yourself as the ultimate life form. And there's something so immensely tonally satisfying about that, I guess. Sonic's kind of pre-built with speed in mind, but for Shadow you've kind of got to work up to it to build up the speed. And I think that's satisfying as all hell. Being good at the movement in this game becomes crucial with some of the levels that you're required to play later to get to one path or the other. One of my favourites and one that I get a chuckle out of every time is the Dark mission on Air Fleet. Within the context of the stage, the president is retreating on his private plane to safety. So you're gonna shoot his plane down. Oh my god, I can't get over this fucking level. It's literally like the meme. It's like the meme about this game.
Hey, Shadow! Race you to the next emerald!
Now hit the second tower.
This shit cracks me up. But anyway, the neutral path is focused on getting to the end of the level to secure the emerald, with Tails on the hero path being there to take down the Black Armed soldiers, intending on shooting the president's ride down. However, if you choose the dark path, you're actually the one responsible for going after the president directly. The mission proceeds with you accumulating gun after gun, ammo after ammo, racking up the dark gauge as you combine speed with precise platforming, and making sure all the while to keep an eye on the president's plane, with your bullets being able to change the direction that the plane will go in. And destroying it results in an incredibly satisfying explosion. That's a good indicator of your damage. It's one of my favourite levels in the game just for the fact that your skills genuinely do come in handy with not only pursuing the president but gunning down gun soldiers who stand in your way. Another one of my levels more so on the platforming side is Lava Shelter, as depending on the route you take, the level is altered massively, and it genuinely tests your perseverance and platforming skills. When it comes to it, this game doesn't fuck around, and it expects you to be aware enough of your environment around you to use your skills and environmental knowledge, your common sense, to the best of your ability. I think the only real thing that I dislike in all of this is the incredibly haphazard camera at times, but it's workable, and I wouldn't be as obnoxious enough as to call it an unplayable mess just because of that. While I do love the way that this game overall plays, I find that basically everything about it somewhat is watered down and made 10 times more frustrating with the bosses. I have mixed feelings on these. I don't mind them, but I find them somewhat frustrating because there's never enough done, I feel, to creatively use the powers and abilities you've got. Conceptually, the bosses are fitting. You're usually going up against one of the parties pivotal to the route you're taking. A lot of the bosses tend to be variants of the Egg Breaker, the Egg Dealer, Black Doom, Black Bull, Diabolon, with some slight tweak to their arenas to offer up a challenge, but I'm not really a fan of them, if I'm gonna be honest. The feelings that I have on them become much more mixed when taking into account the chaos powers you accrue. Chaos Blast is fine enough, albeit damaging the bosses with it doesn't really do incrementing damage. Instead, it kind of just treats the blast affecting the boss more so like if you were hitting them once and only once. But Chaos Control is where my feelings become marred in frustration. See, I like the idea of Chaos Control becoming a time slowdown, but the problem is that when used on some bosses like Black Doom, wherein he has a significant amount of time, phases between when you can damage him and when you can't, it turns the fights into this really sluggish mess where you have to wait for your well-earned Chaos ability to deplete so Black Doom can become attackable again. It's honestly really frustrating, and I remember as a kid, I used to not like replaying the Black Doom boss battle, but if I could change it, then here's what I'd do. Simply put, I would make it so that Chaos Blast either does damage for the duration of the screen nuke, and turn Chaos Control into a straight up time stop ability. Allow Shadow to stop time, set up a wave of attacks, and watch in satisfaction as the attacks take the boss off guard and skewer them. Nevertheless, I don't hate the bosses, I just don't really have that much love for them. If I had to name a favourite though, it would be the Egg Dealer, just because it's a genuinely interesting boss for the mechanic of having to use the randomness of a slot reel against its own creator. A side note, but what is this game's obsession with Eggman Loki being a gambler? Like, Circus Park being built off of rings, now this is the guy suffering from an addiction? Like, are the black arms so frustrating that the man's pouring out his stress in gambling? Poor fucker. With the focus on how whatever objective you choose influences where you go in the story, it fittingly brings me to the talking point of the game, really. The kind of core crux, other than the fact that Shadow wields a Glock. As the game relies on a branching path system, the story accordingly changes through whatever objective you choose, what alignment you decide to side with, often leading to pretty chaotic paths where some of the plot threads that will be detailed at the start get abandoned later as the overall core theme of the path defines itself. This has understandably been a core focus of the criticisms towards this game in later years, in that it creates a incoherent, focusless story that can make your choices previously made seem redundant, and also invalidate the sense of player agency and choice overall. However, while I do share this sentiment, I actually agree with it in a sense. I also understand the logic behind allowing the player to craft a story of their own, albeit with flaws. In the nicest way possible for me to describe it, it feels very fanfiction-esque, in that some intrigue is lost as the plot may be made up along the way. But to be honest, I actually quite like this general structure of the story in this way, because depending on what you choose, it can be a very coherent, poignant story, or it can be a somewhat tangled mess, almost emphasizing the struggle and the kind of madness that you'd feel in Shadow's position. That veil of pure ambiguity that not only makes Shadow so different from the likes of Sonic, but makes him a mystery, even with the events of Adventure 2 put to the close for the most part, more prominent, really. Think of it this way, Shadow is a character who has continuously not been able to get a feel for who he is since day one, with his life aboard the Ark being stolen from him, and the rest of his time since being either working for the enemy, working for the side of good, and then having the time to never really be sure of who or what he is. This is somewhat emphasized in Sonic Heroes as well, as the presence of the Shadow androids confuses the matter on if the Shadow we're even playing as is even the same one from Sonic Adventure 2. So I generally want to give my thoughts on some of the routes here, and also note down how I feel about some of those general plot points. Pure neutral route. This is a route that most people who've played the game have obtained due to its relative simplicity, but also because it's generally the easiest one to obtain overall. The route begins with Shadow being met with Black Doom, who beckons him to find the emeralds, give him to them as promised. Shadow blitzes through Westopolis, ignoring Black Doom and Sonic, and securing not only the first emerald but the second as well. Gun, in response to the invasion, are commanded by the Gun Commander to kill Shadow if he's spotted with the Black Arms. Meanwhile, Black Doom is furious at Shadow's disobedience, while the Hedgehog rightfully shrugs it off, until the alien mentions Gerald, getting Shadow's attention. Deciding to punish Shadow, Black Doom warps the Hedgehog to the ancient ruins of a Black Arms fortress, in which the Arms and Gun are fighting over. Once again, Shadow ignores both sides and acquires the third emerald. After this, the president of the nation continues to hear in on ongoing events, reminiscing about when Sonic and Shadow saved the world back in Sonic Adventure 2. Shadow, meanwhile, ends up in the remains of Prison Island from Sonic Adventure 2, pondering over his past history with the location. Shadow snags the fourth emerald here as Eggman begins to advance his forces out to subdue the Black Arms, out of fear that they won't leave anywhere for Eggman to conquer himself in the end. While it's not exactly defined how he got here, Shadow ends up with Black Doom once again, as the ruins of the Black Arms fortress from before have risen once more, going toe-to-toe with Eggman's incoming fleet. Shadow snags the fifth emerald and pursues the Doctor, ending up at the entrance of one of Eggman's spaces. It's here where the main plot of this route really comes into play, as Shadow encounters the androids modelled after him from Sonic Heroes, complete and ready to go, pretty much, beginning to raise panic within Shadow as he believes he might be one of them, harkening back to what he was feeling during Heroes. Shadow descends deep through the jungle and snags Emerald number 6, where he and a present Omega confront the Doctor once again. After this, Shadow begins to believe that he most likely is one of the Shadow androids, Eggman's abrasiveness and evasiveness about the whole thing, leading the Hedgehog to feel convinced on the matter, who swears revenge upon the Doctor. Shadow descends into Eggman's lava shelter, snagging Emerald number 7, and then takes the Madman on. With all emeralds acquired, Shadow can either choose to believe he is an android and conquer the Eggman Empire for himself in a manner similar to Metal Sonic from the previous game, or vow to surpass the original Shadow, killing Eggman in the process. I've always felt a level of indifference towards this route, but even as a kid, I did think that the idea of the Shadow we play as being like a robot replica of the original was kinda cool, actually. There's something just inherently cool about playing as a robot replica of a character, that twinge of like existential dread, of being so self-aware that you're not the real person you're designed to be, being so like potent and poignant. It hits this certain level of depressing in a way that makes you sympathise rather than fear the fact that the character in question isn't really real in that sense. It contextualises a lot of oddities with Shadow 2, ever since his reintroduction post Sonic Adventure 2. The fact that none of his friends have really told him about his past, despite them knowing fragments of that, could point towards them fearing what would happen if the Shadow in front of them was a replica of the original. The kind of overwhelming existential crisis that would be unleashed within such a person would be catastrophic, especially if they believed they're the real one. Some other details, like the lack of blood that Shadow has when he dies, or how Shadow's never really been shown to be injured, unlike Sonic who has, is very telling and kind of supports the ambiguity of this route. Even the little detail of Omega locking onto Shadow when Omega's whole point is to destroy Eggman robots back in Sonic Heroes during the start of Team Dark's story is an interesting detail, to say the least, and this route supports it a ton. It's a bit more of an introspective but existentially depressing route in that way, focusing on the ambiguity of whether Shadow is really Shadow or not, in that you question who you're playing as, and if you choose to believe this canon, then Shadow gets a level of finality to his story that's different from knowing about the real Shadow's past. There's also kind of a fucked up irony of him actually killing Eggman in this route as well, knowing the fact that Eggman is the grandchild of Gerald, so Gerald's legacy technically dies in this route due to not only Eggman's hubris, but Shadow believing he's not really himself. I think those concepts are kind of cool, to be honest. Pure Dark route. This is probably the route that people have played after doing a pure neutral route, but I somewhat doubt that most completed it due to the surprising difficulty spikes. Anyway, this route starts off once again at Westopolis, with Shadow undergoing Black Doom's objective this time and wiping out the gun soldiers in his way, while also securing Emerald number 1. Gun, in response to the invasion, are commanded by the Gun Commander to kill Shadow if he's spotted with the Black Arms. Meanwhile, Black Doom proceeds to task Shadow with accessing the United Federation's mainframe, which Shadow successfully does. After this, the President of the nation continues to hear in on ongoing events, reminiscing about when Sonic and Shadow saved the world back in Sonic Adventure 2. Shadow, meanwhile, ends up at one of Eggman's bases and decides to pursue the Doctor for answers, wanting to know if the Doctor knows anything about the Black Arms, helping the Doctor set up his defense systems in the process. However, Eggman betrays Shadow and dismisses his quest for the Emeralds if it means getting his past. The two fight, but Eggman loses. Meanwhile, the President is inundated with another alarming phone call describing how the Black Arms have now started to invade Central City. The Black Arms and Shadow stand ready to destroy within the city, Black Doom revealing that Shadow was the ultimate life form, that humans feared him, destroyed him, and now it's time to strike back. After Central City has been crippled by Shadow and the Black Arms, Black Doom warps himself and Shadow to above the Earth itself, happy that the Hedgehog realizes how abominable the humans truly are. Shadow's next task is defined: to secure the Eclipse Cannon, Gerald's creation, the same used by Eggman back in Sonic Adventure 2 to destroy a part of the moon. Shadow takes down the defense systems protecting the Eclipse Cannon, but ends up confronting a gun operative in the mobile defense unit, Blue Falcon. Unfortunately, it's not enough to stop the Hedgehog, as he sends the unit plummeting into the atmosphere of the Earth below. Everything is complete. Black Doom and the Black Arms have officially stated their conquest, eliminating and exterminating anyone who gets in their way. To make good of this, the Eclipse Cannon completely incinerates Central City and the President's accommodation, forcing the man to take refuge within the deepest sect of Gun's headquarters. Despite this attempt, however, the Black Arms and Shadow are already within the complex, ready to exterminate the last level of resistance left. The Gun Commander mobilizes every possible weapon at the utterance of Shadow's name, including the Diablon prototype, intent on revenge at last. Meanwhile, Shadow remembers Gerald's words, deciding he now knows what he must do. Shadow dismantles the last remnants of security within the Gun Fortress, coming face to face with Sonic and the Gun Commander, who's piloting Diablon. Despite their best efforts, the Gun Commander and Sonic are defeated, Sonic desperately asking what Shadow intends to do with the emeralds he's collected across this path. Shadow, eager, says he's going to destroy the planet using them. However, if you choose to do the hero mission and betray Black Doom at the last second, Shadow decides to conquer the universe for himself after defeating Black Doom. Personally, this is one of the most fascinating routes to me because it shows just how dark Shadow can become if he lets his evident distaste for humanity become too much. As you progress through this route, Shadow becomes more and more volatile, far more focused, more sharp, becoming the weapon of mass destruction that Gerald reprogrammed him to be after the death of Maria and before his execution. In this darkly ironic way, Shadow chooses to follow that programming, that line of thinking, condemning humanity with the Black Arms in tow. Black Doom seeing him as a genuinely desirable ally, which is where really some of the most gut-wrenching aspects of this route come into play. How the trauma of someone who lost everything is manipulated, harnessed, how Shadow brutalizes people who, sure, work for Gun, but they had no stake in what happened 50 years prior. How Shadow is willing to side with a force of evil if it means he gets to condemn humans as a whole. Even some of the boss fights like that of the Blue Falcon, as you watch the man inside the machine panic as he falls, heading towards the deep blue of the planet below, most likely not going to survive the fall due to re-entry. Knowing that in all likelihood there was probably at least a single person left in Central City, as the Eclipse Cannon decimates homes, lives, history, workplaces, civilization, everything Maria wished peace for. It's heartbreaking. Her wish is bastardized and mutated even more as Shadow willingly assists in the conquest for the Eclipse Cannon. And it gets darker as the Black Arms aren't necessarily there to conquer the planet. They could have done that from day one realistically. Shadow, however, in the ending where Sonic the Gun Commander most likely perished at the Hedgehog's hand, does want to destroy the planet. So not only has Shadow been completely indoctrinated to the war tactics of Black Doom, but those tactics and that access will allow Shadow to most likely decimate the Black Arms, humanity, and every living creature that isn't himself in the process, creating a path where Shadow by extension will most likely die alone, abandoning everything from his former friends to his memories, suffering in absolution for the sake of revenge. It gets darker when you consider that in the Betrayal ending, Black Doom loses to the very thing he brought into his army, how a pawn that he brought in became a queen and immediately decimated the entire Black Arms, the entire universe ready for Shadow to conquer, as Black Doom and humanity will end here at this very moment. I know this game gets a lot of flack, but when you think on these darker aspects of the game, and especially this route, it becomes extremely dark and depressing knowing that in this timeline, Shadow is not only the end of everything and the one who rules in the dust of the places that he will ruin, but he is so fueled by his own hatred that he has bastardized the wish of the one person who meant everything to him. Pure hero route. I'm sure you know the gist by now. Shadow begins in Westopolis, but this time he helps Sonic rid the Black Arms from the city, pretty much. The Gun Commander demands that the soldiers kill Shadow if he's spotted with the Black Arms. However, Sonic and Shadow briefly get to banter after dealing with the Armada. Meanwhile, Doom's Eye wanders up to them, speaking of the third Chaos Emerald, before departing. Sonic takes off with Shadow following suit. The two deal with an armoured Black Arms tank going through the level, Lethal Highway, before encountering Doom's Eye once again, Shadow demanding the alien hand over the third emerald. Amused, Doom's Eye summons the Black Bull to try and eradicate the two hedgehogs, but they best the thing with ease. After this, the president of the nation continues to hear in on ongoing events, reminiscing about when Sonic and Shadow saved the world back in Sonic Adventure 2. Meanwhile, Shadow's on the hunt for the fourth Chaos Emerald, where he ends up chasing after Tails, who currently has it. The two blaze through Eggman's Circus Park, which Gun has a presence at. Speaking of, Gun happily reports that the aliens have been driven out of Westopolis entirely, in which they've been contained within the nearby forest. The commander is informed of Shadow's presence nearby within, who subsequently orders the gun force down in the area to militarize more, vowing to bury the Hedgehog and the Black Arms. Shadow ends up encountering Rouge and decides to help her and the gun force drive off the Black Arms from the forest. The Hedgehog encounters Black Doom once again through Doom's Eye, who surprisingly reveals that the arms aren't here on Earth for the purpose of extermination, shocking Rouge from afar. Doom's Eye mockingly tells Shadow that he needs to rest for tomorrow's ritual, summoning Black Bull once again to try and take the Hedgehog down. With the help of Rouge, they're able to snuff it out once more. Escaping deep into the forest, Shadow ends up outside of one of Eggman's bases, encountering Sonic once again. Sonic mentions that he's heading to the Ark, piquing Shadow's interest, and subsequently getting the Black Hedgehog to come with them to space. Noticing one of the emeralds powering the ship, Shadow snags it while heading towards the Ark, causing an alarm to blare out. What happens from here is somewhat vague, but the alarm triggers a memory within Shadow from 50 years ago, in which Maria desperately pleads for Shadow to help everyone aboard the Ark, as Gerald's artificial chaos experiments have run amok, threatening the safety of everyone aboard. Shadow, within the clearly altered memory, is able to drive off the artificial chaos, but the results of the past remain the same. Shadow desperately pleads for Maria to not eject him down to Earth as she dies. The past cannot be altered. From here, Shadow and Sonic are aboard the Ark and are scouring the place as the Black Comet comes into view. Shadow feeling uneasy as he can feel the strange connection he has to the comet itself. The two hedgehogs manage to get aboard and blast their way through the alien environment, encountering Black Doom, who mocks them jeeringly. Remembering his promise to Maria so long ago, Shadow vows to protect the planet no matter what, taking Black Doom on. Defeating the alien leader, Shadow acquires all of the emeralds, intending to keep his promise to Maria. declaring that Black Doom and the Black Arms are finished. I like this route for a few reasons. I feel that thematically it's fitting in that the core crux of this route is his promise to Maria, the one person who meant absolutely everything to Shadow at the end of the day. It's Shadow's quest for the emeralds here that ultimately cuts through to the heart of his memories, reminding him of his general presence, his reason to live, to be protecting the place Maria desperately wished happiness upon, despite never being able to really experience that herself due to being ill. It's thematically satisfying, and it's honestly quite the positive but somber ending, in that despite Black Doom trying to pull the Hedgehog to the dark side, Eggman trying to use him for whatever means, Gun out for blood, Shadow still does the right thing. I think a lot about how this route involves Shadow having to come back to one of his memories of stopping the artificial chaos from wreaking havoc aboard the Ark itself, how the memory itself has details bleeding in from the future, the present, gun soldiers here and there, guns to just pick up, so many weird inconsistencies that it plays right into the ambiguity of Shadow as a character. But in spite of that, Shadow still tries to do what's right, because the end result otherwise is destruction and chaos. It's a very typical route in that sense, but seeing Shadow vow to keep his promise to Maria is a nice but somber feeling. When someone you cherish is no longer with you, the only thing that you can do is move onward. And Shadow just decides to do that. He decides to keep living for her sake. Now, with these core roots out of the way with the story, I wish to discuss a few other things concerning the story, particularly certain plot points. But to start off with, I want to talk about two roots that particularly stick out to me, that I'm particularly fond of for their thematic meaning. So let's talk about Route 181. Twilight Arc, a neutral hero path in which Shadow goes from Westopolis to Glyphic Canyon, Prison Island, Mad Matrix, Space Gadget, and Cosmic Fall. This is a route that I have a lot of love for due to it playing quite well into not only the ambiguity of Shadow's story, but the idea of the system of being a hero or a villain to do good and bad. All throughout this story up until Prison Island, Shadow chooses to remain on the neutral path, avoiding being on one side of the conflict or the other. However, this changes when he chooses to help Charmy recover top secret gun files, following the Bee back to the rest of the Chaotix, in which he then helps SBO activate the terminals within Eggman's network. The two are detected by Eggman, but take down the Doctor nonetheless, with Shadow escaping and landing in front of the entrance to Eggman's base in Iron Jungle. Sonic spots Shadow, the two head to the Ark, where Shadow is given a quiet moment to contemplate. It's somber, haunting, helping Shadow realize that he's been here before, that something is primarily amiss. But before he can stew existentially in those thoughts, Shadow's cut off by Sonic, who notes the swarm of Black Arms soldiers parading aboard the place. The two give chase, and Sonic, being as playful as he is, beckons Shadow to race him aboard the Ark in the same way they once did back in Adventure 2, albeit with different intents. Shadow ignores this and chooses to pursue the emerald on his own terms, beating Sonic to the punch and actually having time to question everything around him. And that's when the Gun Commander shows up, pistol in hand, intent on confronting him. The Gun Commander surprises Shadow, who becomes confrontational himself. The Commander reveals that Maria was the only family he really knew, blaming Shadow for her death when the Ark was raided by Gun. The Commander reveals that he witnessed Shadow's creation, Gerald and Black Doom conversing as the latter had a hand in the Hedgehog's birth. Shadow, rightfully shocked, asks the obvious, but the Gun Commander is angry at the Hedgehog's confusion. The Commander shoots Shadow outright, but the Hedgehog is faster and contemplates.
If what you say is true, then I will respectfully accept my fate.
You mean to tell me that you really don't remember a thing?
But I just need some time to uncover the real truth.
The Commander questions if Shadow really doesn't remember a thing, but the Hedgehog walks away, trying to determine things for himself, clearly musing on what he's just been told. The Gun Commander falls to his knees, dejected. Choosing the objective in the last level of this route, Cosmic Fall, determines your ending. If you choose to secure the emerald, Shadow takes on Eggman, having snuck aboard to snag the emeralds for himself. Eggman bitterly asks Shadow if he's forgotten if it was Gerald who created him, after Eggman is defeated by Shadow. Shadow, ensuingly, vows to live on, protecting the Ark from all possible threats. Shadow, unlike other routes in which he usually kills Eggman at the end of the path, demands Eggman to leave and never return, unwilling to allow anyone to violate the Ark. This ending particularly hits for me because it highlights just how much the information that Shadow gets in his routes influences his overall perspective and quest by the end. Shadow starts off so aimless, so unsure, keeping to himself, until he decides to band together with the info sleuths known as the Chaotix, eventually catching up with Sonic and encountering the Gun Commander, who reveals the evident truth. What sticks in my mind about this is how the Gun Commander has inherent bias from the events of 50 years ago, but more on that in a bit. But because of this, Shadow vows to protect the very place where such tragedy once occurred so long ago, feeling that it is ultimately best to try and fix the mistakes of the past. It's why I'm so fond of Eggman being the final boss of this route, because this is a man who desires conquest and power at all costs, an antithesis of everything Gerald was at the start, a man who was somewhat shaped by his grandfather's dreams, now here to secure the emeralds. It's an interesting dynamic, as the outcomes of Gerald's work, Shadow and technically Eggman, naturally share that connection, but Shadow spares Eggman from a brutal death unlike the other routes, giving him a chance to leave. It's haunting in the sense that Eggman doesn't really provide mercy all that often, so the man is naturally confused when others give him mercy instead. Shadow will stay aboard the Ark for possibly forever, but Shadow providing mercy is dark if you believe that Shadow was the cause of the gun raid so long ago in this canon. A creature of inherent darkness spares a man who really doesn't deserve mercy for the countless conquests he's done, including disrespecting sacred ground here aboard the Ark. However, if you choose Vector's mission in Cosmic Fall, things are a lot different, leading you to Route 182, Compensation for a Miracle. The route plays out like that of Twilight Arc, with the exception being the objective you choose. Black Doom is infuriated at Shadow's defiance, but the Hedgehog pushes on, asking for the truth. Black Doom accepts, revealing that Black Doom did in fact have a hand in the Hedgehog's creation. Shadow is, nevertheless, and rightfully so, mortified, dejected even. Vector having to ask the Hedgehog if he's even alright. Shadow, nevertheless, accepts that he will have to take responsibility for his crimes to avenge the victims of the Ark. Black Doom is naturally unamused with such absurdity, deciding to kill Shadow. Shadow and Vector defeat Black Doom, Shadow having all the emeralds at last. But having them doesn't really mean anything by the end, as Shadow declares himself a research experiment gone deadly wrong, having wished to have never been created. Vector tells him not to go there to try and get him to understand, but Shadow's already walking away. Just to preface this, trigger warning for this on screen, but this route is possibly the most depressing one outside of the dark routes, because Shadow believes himself to be a genuine abomination, a monster, a cause of murder and misery. Black Doom only confirms that, but the Hedgehog's ability to have empathy angers the alien, with Shadow having to take him down. Even as Black Doom beckons that the Black Arms will rise again, Shadow's stuck in his head, wishing he had never been created, walking away. I've seen a fair amount of criticism of Vector here, of how aloof and out of touch his presence is here, but I beg to differ. Vector is a character who is familiar enough with the Sonic cast. His whole shtick is being a part of the Chaotix detective agency, of trying to pay the bills and the rent, surviving. He's a very laid-back guy, stuck in a situation where pivotal data for whatever sake he has here is on the line. He's here at the Ark, at such unstable ground, for whatever the reason, but even he knows that Black Doom is a presence that will manipulate. He similarly dealt with Eggman before, in the past. Vector's presence here is that of an optimist trying to make sense of things, with his perspective being outside of Shadow's in that he critically sees information and tries to connect it together, with Shadow being the opposite in that if there's compelling enough information, Shadow will believe it. It feels thematically fitting to have the two characters of similar gameplay styles from this game and Heroes being here at the end to figure out what they need, which is why it's so tragic that Shadow walks away at the end, emeralds in tow, Vector trying to reason with Shadow that things may not be as they seem, and he's not wrong. There is way more to the story than what Black Doom and the Gun Commander have told Shadow. The thing that gets me about this ending even more is that the arena that you fight Black Doom in has a limit. Space is below, there's no entrance or exit seemingly. So where's Shadow gonna go from here? Because the last time that Shadow had the emeralds, he died, or was assumed dead. Is the implication that Shadow chooses suicide? To leave it all behind? Die? Maybe that's just me interpreting it, but you have to consider the fact that there's virtually no way to get out of this area, and again, Shadow died with the emeralds last time we saw. This route is haunting for that reason, because it genuinely highlights the kind of pain you'd have to feel to know so little and want to know so much, having the truth given to you and the horror of knowing when things aren't right, to seek a cognito hazard and then suffer its consequences. It's such a different route tonally that manages to place together a lot of the interesting plot points, but there's something just heart-wrenching about seeing Shadow, after everything we know he's gone through, to seemingly choose death in the end, and Vector's helpless to stop him. At least that's how I interpret it. It's stuff like this that, however, makes me love this game for what it tried to do with the branching paths and story, because the paths you can take are so different from one another that I can't help but appreciate the genuine level of effort that was put in to try and give the players variety, to create their own story with Shadow, to create their own canon. Now, here's the part where I would actually go through every story path you can take, but Jesus Christ! Yeah, I can't go through all of these. The video will be 5 hours long. But I have to genuinely admire the level of combinations, the paths that you can even take here. So instead, I kind of want to give my thoughts on a few characters, general plot points, that come up within these routes, since I feel there's barely any attention ever given to them. The Gun Commander's Vendetta. I find the character of the Gun Commander to be genuinely way more interesting than people give credit for. He's introduced in this game as a pivotal part of Shadow's past, having been aboard the Ark with Maria and Shadow 50 years ago. Now he's the commander of Gun, who are mainly hunting Shadow and the Black Arms down. In the routes where he is able to confront Shadow one-on-one, especially that of Twilight Arc, it feels incredibly satisfying to see the two finally meet, especially since for most of the route he's been teased somewhat as Shadow's antithesis, or at least someone who will hold him to that count. Something I don't see being acknowledged much in discussions about him is the fact that despite knowing or being somewhat aware of the gun raid on the Ark, surviving it even, leading to Maria's death and Gerald's imprisonment, Shadow's imprisonment, he is either unaware of the full facts or aware and willing to work with Gun despite everything. That ambiguity surrounding why he works with Gun is interesting to me, and I'd like to genuinely see him return at some point and maybe get a little bit more development on why he works with Gun of all people, considering that they, well, kind of took away everything that he had aboard the Ark. For all of Gerald's fears that Shadow would be used as a weapon by Gun, Gun kind of uses the Commander somewhat in the same way as their weapon instead. Someone with so much will and capacity to use violence and enact force on his enemies that it makes Shadow's potential as a weapon to Gun 50 years past seem incredibly silly in comparison. In my opinion anyway. Black Doom's Ritual of Prosperity. This is a plot point that I find kind of mystifying, if you want me to be honest, since the result of that ritual per se doesn't really come to fruition unless you're in a route where the Black Arms win, but I find it fascinating how Black Doom and his intentions aren't to massacre humanity, but to instead enslave and subjugate them. I've always liked this, actually, as Black Doom's sparse presence throughout most runs makes him exudingly intimidating and special when you do see him. This is an alien who has an exceedingly strategic mind, plan at play, and if you play into the darker paths of Shadow, you only make it easier for him. In general, I have always liked Black Doom because he shares that level of ambiguity with Shadow, which fits due to certain revelations I'll explain later, but his general presence in the game is so strange in that regard. He's this ominous antagonist who is technically everywhere all at once, and yet he's always with the Black Arms at every moment, regardless. The Arc. Despite the Arc being so crucial to Shadow's past, its utilization within the different paths and plots you can choose to pursue I feel is somewhat forgotten about amidst the discourse concerning the game. In a lot of the routes, Black Doom and the Black Arms attempt to seize control of the abandoned colony. In other routes, the Arc becomes this pivotal tool by Sonic and the others to get to places like the Black Comet, or in some routes is used by Eggman. It's interesting that after the events of Sonic Adventure 2, the Arc remains abandoned still, but for whatever side in the path you choose to take, it's primarily used just as a progression tool, whittling down the importance of the colony to just that of a means of turning the tides, almost like nobody really wants to open up the Pandora's box of memories that exist here. To Shadow though, it is a literal, physical reminder of his past, which makes whatever objective he chooses within the Arc-themed levels poignant in that regard. Eggman's plans. Eggman is honestly probably the most bizarre factor in this game to me now that I think about it, but whatever he decides to do in the routes you can take is fascinating to me. In some routes, the Doctor owns a spooky castle full of chow. In another route, he actively wages war against the Black Arms and Gun for the sake of having a place to build Eggman Land, because if there's no city left, he's screwed. Meanwhile, in another route, he retreats into the jungle as Gun has surrounded him. In another, Gun's trying to dismantle his circus theme park, so on. But I find Eggman's presence in this game interesting, as he's really the only character aside from Shadow, depending on the route, who is purely out there doing whatever the hell he wants for the sake of his own goals, selfish or not. Depending on what path you're choosing to take actually, Eggman, surprisingly, is considered heroic within the game's gameplay. Attacking his robots in certain levels is actually an action towards evil. He becomes heroic depending on the angle you view it from, with the series regular taking it badly that there's another force trying to do the very thing he's been trying to do for years. In a way, you could also view it as the last real connection to Gerald deciding to pursue his own goals with varying results, which makes it genuinely shocking that Shadow in some routes chooses to outright kill Eggman. Sonic and Friends. To be honest, I don't really have much to say about Sonic and company in this game, strangely enough, but their presence in such a serious plot at times can be kind of strange to me. It's interesting that they're not really shown as outright winning or changing the plot, turning the tides on their own, unless Shadow's there to help them. It kind of puts into perspective just how terrifyingly powerful Shadow is, in that Shadow can turn the tide of a battle so damn fast, and fate is basically in his hands here, which makes him feel so much more imposing and strong in this game than even Sonic and company, which is an interesting dynamic shift, I feel. Speaking of imposing, how about we discuss the atmosphere and soundtrack of this game? I think that has been long overdue. Hello and welcome to the break portion of the video. If you've gotten this far, feel free to sit up, stand up, get yourself a nice cup of tea, coffee, whatever you drink, and take a break. You've been watching for about an hour, so I'm not surprised if you'll need a bit of time to, just take a bit of breathing room from how much I've been fucking talking. But yeah, I hope you've been enjoying the video so far, and to be honest, I'm really happy that I've made this. I've been wanting to do a video about Shadow for years at this point, and I'm really happy to finally have a chance to, do it. If you like what you're seeing and you want to see more, feel free to hit the notification bell, feel free to subscribe, and if you want, feel free to donate to my Ko-Fi if you want to support the series and if you want to support me in that way. Ko-Fi.com/Pachimochi. There's a common complaint within Shadow the Hedgehog, more specifically the requirement of having to replay Westopolis at least 10 times minimum. I've never really gelled with this criticism. While I understand that replaying something 10 times can be frustrating, this implies that people have solely been playing the 10 minimum routes back to back, which personally doesn't really make much sense to me. Like any game, Shadow the Hedgehog is a game I feel is best served in chunks. There's a reason that most games tell you to take breaks. How can you enjoy something if you constantly smother yourself in it? Even for this video, I didn't play this game back to back. I played other things, I listened to music, I worked on other videos. Video games are a form of media like anything else that takes time to digest and process. Because of this, however, it feels to me that Westopolis has become a bit of a tragic indicator for how the genuine love and attention to detail atmosphere within this game has been lost and forgotten in the process of the criticism leveled at how this game functions. Within this game, I feel, stands a genuinely impressive level of atmosphere. Each level is entirely unique, drenched in its own theme and sound that, despite a few levels sharing some general aesthetics, makes each one feel important in their own right. Even down to the tracks of each level, they brilliantly mesh with the level that they're set to. However, I want to go a bit in depth on this, so let's go over the levels in detail. Westopolis is absolutely brilliant. The music is such a fitting introduction to not only the game, but the tone and atmosphere of it too, utilising that classic rock sound that the Sonic games prior have come to be known for. Westopolis introduces a repeating habit of this game's soundtrack in that the familiar musical tropes of the Sonic games are met with more alien sounds, with the inclusion of both rock and this new sound being fittingly representative of the fight between Gun and the Black Arms, the ensuing struggle. The usual rock sound of the Sonic games is actively being corroded by this new alien sound, fittingly reflecting the war between humanity and this new threat. It's a perfect backtrack to the level itself as well, which just has this pungent atmosphere of chaos to it. Lasers rain down from the sky and decimate the earth. Black arms soar and scamper around as they hunt down humans. Rubble litters the usually smooth roads, and at any moment a laser could come down to strike you if you're not careful. Just from the atmosphere alone, it feels like an invasion, and it honestly feels really refreshing to me. In most Sonic games, you start off in some colourful, vibrant variation of a hillside, but Shadow's story begins by leaving from such a location and plummeting into the depths of the city below, under siege, and it immediately feels like you're in for something completely different. Everything about this level screams of being under siege, under stress, and as you progress deeper into it, that only rings more true as the very roads out of the city have outright been destroyed. Other than the conflict between Gun and the Black Arms, I really like Westopolis because it's representative of the struggle Shadow has to face. The guy has no memory, but now he feels he has to choose between sides if it means he can uncover his past, and the music feels like you've got to choose and make your decision now, hurry the fuck up, or you probably get lost in the chaos accordingly. The track fits with the level, it's foreboding, it's dark, but determined more than anything else. If you're on the dark route, this is a joyful backing track to your button inputs massacring Gun's forces. If you're on the hero route, this is a track of pure relief that someone's going to push back against these invaders. Or if you're on the neutral, both the synths and the rock, the Black Arms and Sonic, Gun, whatever, are too much for you, and that the only thing that matters is yourself. Glyphic Canyon. I'm not really a fan of this level, but hey, I can still enjoy what it offers. I thematically love what it represents through its music and its atmosphere, this deep in the trench style level focusing on Gun's outer reach, then more ground level missions, fighting in the literal dunes outside of civilization against the ensuing armada, and Gun has the advantage here. The level is drenched in this musty khaki yellow colour, familiarly like a war zone, while the music is coated in that pure rock-like grunge. This is humanity's territory, and they won't give it up. For the hero route, you're on a mission in the dunes. Dark, the music, and the level is merely for reactivating an already present super fortress for the Black Arms to use at their convenience, turning the tide. Neutral, you're running through what's essentially a war camp, and you're not welcome. Despite my general distaste for the level, I love that it's got such a sleazy, unstable vibe to it, that at any moment there may be a swarm of Black Arms soldiers or Gun soldiers waiting to strike, or a tornado waiting to swoop you up into the sky and spit you out on the other side. Prison Island is one of my favourites. Originating from Sonic Adventure 2, the island was destroyed in that game, but seemingly lives on as a toxic dump of neon green fluids, most of it only being manoeuvrable via hoverboards of questionable origin, basically unfit for human traversal. The music here is really rock-based, harkening back to Sonic Adventure 2 in that regard, but there's kind of a suave and naughty feel to it, in that you're basically intruding on abandoned ground, urban exploration. Exploring this place, as Gun's robots have seemingly been using this toxic wasteland to keep captured Black Arm soldiers here. It feels like a dirty little secret's been exposed, that Gun's been utilising the place in secret for their own ends, even with its highly toxic and archaic state. It's a bizarre comparison, but it reminds me a ton of GoldenEye actually, just the idea of intruding on this secret base while groovy music plays in the background. Like, I don't know, is it just me, or, like, I think that anyway. Shadow's presence here feels very fitting. He was imprisoned here so long ago. Sonic also was imprisoned here when Gun, for some reason, assumed Sonic was Shadow, and Gerald's cell probably still exists in these ruins somewhere. The level design is archaic and strange, and most of it isn't accessible unless you take the right path. If you're on the Dark mission, you're here to destroy Gun's last bit of presence. Hero, you're helping the Chaotix with their skeevy, suspicious hunt for top-secret gun files left haphazardly across the ruins. Neutral, getting the emerald that lingers here. I adore that there's a level of history to this particular iteration of the island, how the natural fauna and flora of the island has begun to retake control. Honestly, it's such a visually beautiful level to me for those aspects, and I really love it. And I like that in a level that requires you to recklessly surf on toxic ground, it's befitting of the fact that Gun have recklessly left this place to rot. Sky Troops is actually, in contrast to Glyphic Canyon, a level I really like, though it really instills the fear of falling in a game like this. Jesus, it does not help my fear of heights in games like this. There's something about that endless skybox just veering into the distance that instills this primal, intricate fear in me, and that really coalesces with my overall thoughts about the atmosphere of this level, alongside the music. It has this ancient feel to it, grand, like you've discovered something amazing, but it's paired with the idea that if you fall at any point, there's no coming back from it. The rock-like music from Glyphic Canyon has been completely subsumed by the almost ancient feel to the sound to this level, a change that I really like, a floating fortress for the Black Arms to set course from on land and decimate everything below. Fittingly, Gun's presence here has diminished, being ominously missing, while Eggman's deciding to wage war against Black Doom and the Black Arms for the fact that if there's nowhere left to conquer, how can Eggman build his empire? It's kind of a curious contrast, honestly, in that in the midst of things, Eggman here looks good in comparison to Black Doom. How tides turn. But I like the general theming of the lunacy of Eggman and the composite determination of Black Doom going up against each other across the skies, setting everything asunder. There's such a level of overwhelming power across the entire stage, and I really love the fact that you even have to blast through the clouds and the storm waging within at one point if it means that you can get through. Following Eggman means destroying the temples that power the whole fortress. Black Doom's path means you'll take Eggman's fleet down instead. Ignoring both and running for the goal means you'll pursue things on your own. Iron Jungle is not one of my favourite levels, I'll be honest with you. I've always thought it was a bit bland, but I do like that we get a bit of Eggman here, desperately trying to fend off the pressure of Gun, who's clearly not in the mood to deal with him trying to also wage war when the Black Arms are currently on their doorstep. The atmosphere of this level is so industrial, but in a way that's different from Gun, feeling so reminiscent of places like Final Fortress and Rail Canyon from Sonic Heroes. The inhabited base, the grind rails, the grunge guitar signifying a gun presence, while also being a little reminiscent of Rail Canyon, plus the uncanny inclusion of shadow androids building upon that plotline from Heroes. It all feels so distinctly Eggman, which I feel is an advantage to this level sticking out, as no other level really shares the kind of aesthetic that this one does. The sound of this level, however, is something I quite like, because it also feels like Heroes, but with the added edge of Shadow being determined to get through the entire base as fast as possible in pursuit of the truth, and I really like that. Lava Shelter is so fucking cool. That line Shadow says at the beginning is so fucking badass as you soar over cramped grind rails just barely above the boiling lava below, egg robots ready to knock you off course. This is one of my absolute favourites in terms of atmosphere. This constant threat at the lava below, the dimly lit rooms surrounded by Eggman's technology and machines, how the platforms are so tight and lack guardrails, it feels so hostile in a distinctly Eggman way. This feeling of finality, pungent in the entire level, as this is where Shadow will get answers, even if he has to wring them out of Eggman in the process. The music really works with this level especially, feeling just as fittingly harsh and gritty as the gauntlet you will literally be going through. I quite like the inclusion of vocals around the 1 minute mark or so of the track that plays in this level. I have no idea what they're saying, but I think it fits to make the level stand out. It gives it a bit of presence. Honestly, this is one of the levels within the game where I think that the atmosphere and the soundtrack actually really perfectly complement the game's difficulty, as while the music and the atmosphere allude to the gauntlet ahead, it becomes especially more fitting depending on the alignment you side with. Pursue the Doctor on your own, or with Omega. You go the normal route and enjoy a mostly stressless ride into the Doctor's inner sanctum, protected from the mounting pressure of Gun. But if you help the Doctor, you have to go through a completely new route that opens up. Magma and lava absorbing the platforms you usually take, as you have to scale the base before the magma scales you. Hangrails that seem so useless in the other route, becoming your lifeline as you have to make some really big leaps of faith, help the Doctor set off his security systems, just survive. Other than the soundtrack here being fit into the level itself, I feel it also complements what Shadow's going through in this route. After all, is he an android, or is he the real Shadow? Why is nobody telling him a single thing? Eggman's withheld the answers for too long. Time to scramble him, send him straight to hell. Though Lava Shelter seems the closest thing to it anyway. Digital Circuit is so upbeat and groovy that you can't help but forget that you're travelling through the fucking internet. This shit's so fucking cool! And the game busts out this neon electric Tron-esque style while you blitz through the digital space. The blocky, almost entirely polygonal wireframe aesthetic of the level combined with the surprisingly techno synth-like sound makes it unique. Mechanical as a level, with the atmosphere and the environment of the level actually being a part of the gameplay, as you have to use waypoints within the stage to progress further. It only adds to the abstract nature of this stage how Tron-like, Res-like it is. Sonic games have done levels similar to this before, and since, but I think this is the best fitting example of a level set in cyberspace, a digital space, really outside of Sonic Frontiers, in which it feels like you're in a network. It feels like you're a rogue agent going through the internet, and I love it. In this deeply ironic way, a place Gun is arguably familiar with feels just as alien to you, the player, as the actual alien locations you'll visit in the game and its various routes. It's quite abstract as a level, honestly, and it reminds me of Res in particular, and a little bit of Code Lyoko as well, which is immediately to my favour. I am very biased for these kind of levels in media, like in games, so I immediately love Digital Circuit for that reason, and another that we'll talk about soon. I think the fact that this realm is so abstract and strange immediately helps to differentiate this route from the neutral path, which gives you Glyphic Canyon as level number 2. In Glyphic Canyon, it's all about fighting in the dunes and the dirt and the gun soldiers. In this level, you're avoiding literal firewalls and essentially exploiting the system. As a big fan of these kind of levels and games, I think this is stellar and it's really groovy. Cryptic Castle I'm kind of mixed on it, really. There's a lot I like about it, and a lot that I don't, but what's undeniable to me is that the atmosphere is pretty fantastic. It conveys such a haunted aspect to the level really well. Haunted and spooky, kind of like in a Nightmare Before Christmas way, rather than actual horror, which I'm fine with. The level design is cramped and narrow and has very little room for en masse exploration, adding to that spooky, narrow feel with the dark pit below everything and the glowing moon in the distance looming over the entire place, being really stunning, actually. The music perfectly conveys that spooky feel to it as well, that you somehow gone far off course, that you're in such a strange place. Eggman seemingly owns the place, and the Black Arms have attempted with little success to capture it, or perhaps they don't think the place is even worth the conquest. The introduction of using Black Arm Slime to traverse through the level also raises a lot of odd questions as well, but it only adds to the feel of it more so. In the hero mission, you're after trying to find Cream the Rabbit, who Amy states has gone missing in the castle. If you find her, she mentions that her chow, cheese, is also missing, with the second half of the objective being to find that little fella. It's a unique mission in that regard, and it's probably the only mission in the game with an objective that outright changes when you complete its first half. Headcanon here, but I always thought that this was just Hang Castle from Sonic Heroes, fully converted by Eggman into a spooky little place. The dude does have a knack for the theatrical. I will admit though, I do kind of prefer Hang Castle to this. The main reason as such being that it feels genuinely more spooky in feel and it's a lot more atmospheric than Cryptic Castle, and the unique environment of flipping the whole place upside down makes the level feel genuinely really unique, especially in terms of the music. I feel that if Cryptic Castle had kept the gravity switching mechanic of Hang Castle, it would have probably made for a much more atmospheric and generally environmentally interesting level. But nevertheless, I think the atmosphere here is stellar, and while I'm not really a fan of how the music loops pretty much, I do kind of wish there was more variation in that regard. I think it's a fine enough level, I'm just not that big of a fan of it. Central City fills me with dread. Moving on. Okay, fine, I'll go into detail. Honestly though, as a kid, getting to this level filled me with this sinking feeling of pure dread. Even now, I still feel it to an extent, and because of that, I think that this is an utterly stellar level in terms of atmosphere and in terms of just the general structure of it, as well as the music. The music really goes well at this level. The level itself is drenched in a fair bit of context. The Black Arms in the Pure Dark route are invading Central City and have the place wired to blow up in several different locations. A literal terrorist attack with intent to destroy, even if people are still around. By this point, Shadow's under the thumb of Black Doom, being fed whatever Black Doom wants him to hear, so Shadow can act effectively. The level has this unusual structure in that it has no designated goal ring, a time limit set above you indicating the ensuing end of the city. Only a hero and a dark mission exist here. Sweep the bombs with Knuckles, or ensure that the bigger bombs ensure that the city is blown to Kingdom Come. Everything about this level is panic-inducing. You feel like a rat inside a maze with no escape. The Black Arms and gun are at each other's throats. There's no goal ring, just objectives to complete. The music only adds to how fucking stressful and cramped this level feels, as it's incredibly easy to get lost, and as the timer ticks down, it only adds more pressure onto you. As a kid, I could never complete this level, and on occasion I still find it really difficult to complete, but it really instills this terror of being so trapped in your circumstances of having to either save everyone or be their doom. The music and atmosphere of this level is incredibly effective, and I love it for that reason, but good god does a pit form in my stomach when I actually play the level and I have to watch the countdown go down, as the music only adds to how fucking stressful playing this level is for me. This level is a reason why I do not like maze-like levels in video games, and it's also a reason why I do not like countdown timers. They instill a primal fear in me that once shit hits zero, I feel like I'm gonna fucking panic. And you know what? If that's the way that this level works, then kudos to it, because it's incredibly effective. The Ark is an extremely haunting level in the context of it all. Fueled by hate, Shadow goes to the Ark per Black Doom's orders. You're here to seize the damn place, and as the player, you might already know the context behind what this place means to Shadow. So to come here for conquest is heartbreaking, the dissolution of Maria's wish. The music is a remix of sorts of Final Rush, but somehow off. Everything about it is just off. More synth life, less guitar, a sign of the Black Arms' conquest over the human race, and Shadow as what's supposed to be such a groovy theme with determination and intent in its original context has been utterly harvested, cannibalized, perverted, corroded by the circumstances at play. Even the inclusion of glitchy vocals in the second half makes the track feel so corroded and wrong, like Black Doom and all that hateful, condemning influence has rooted itself in something so familiar to us. All of what happened in Sonic Adventure 2 means nothing to you anymore, and as the harbinger of Black Doom's army, you're here to condemn everyone. You can either go for the gold ring, or you can seize the arc with the destruction of the planetoid's defense system, leading towards the Eclipse Cannon. This level has such an off atmosphere, and that this beautiful, abandoned space colony, left like this after Sonic Adventure 2, is to be reawakened for destructive purposes, turning this place Maria lived on into this weapon of mass destruction that will render Black Doom's enemies as ash and dust. Even the fact that there's rarely any actual ground to stand on most of the time adds this level of anxiety to the whole thing, and that you literally don't have time to appreciate this beautiful aesthetic of the level, so instead you're here to destroy it. I think it's clever, and I also think that it requires the player to be very precise. If you get off of the little black arms creature that you're flying around on for most of it, you'll just plummet to the earth below, which I think is a interesting touch considering Shadow's story, the end to his story in Sonic Adventure 2. Gun Fortress is one of my favourite levels in this game, but somehow the most tragic of them all. It's humanity on its last legs, the president within his complex after the Black Arms used the Eclipse Cannon, unfortunately low power, on Earth, obliterating Central City and Westopolis. Everything about this level is drenched in this tone of regret, tragedy, loss. The music is very quiet, smooth, swayed with the guitar, as you're here to decide humanity's fate once and for all. You're so powerful at this point that you can influence the outcome of the story, a harbinger of fate. The music itself feels like a desperate final cry, because it's this smooth rock track on a level made of caverns full of self-defense systems. This contemplative, almost haunting track where the last remnants of humanity have come together to basically defend themselves. They're not even trying to kill the Black Arms much anymore, they're just trying to survive. It's hauntingly aware that it's its last stand. Never has a Sonic game had a track where the good guys just accept that they're most likely going to die, and that they're going to fight in their last moments before the inevitable end, the incoming end to everything. Gun Fortress is, in an atmospheric sense and a musical sense, humanity accepting its end as the Black Arms harvest the planet for their own means, and the dreams of Maria and Gerald, depending on the route, willingly die with what remains of humanity in that level due to Shadow's actions. Most of the level is automation and turrets because there's so little of humanity willing to fight left that it's just security systems on standby. They most likely know that those things are going to be compromised, but they're not willing to sit down and die. They want to go out fighting. It's somber, contemplative, sad even, but suave and stylish. And depending on the route, you're either using this as the victory lap as Shadow guns down the rest of humanity for himself, or Black Doom, or it's the theme of an individual who comes in at the last second to be the hero in the darkest days. An atmospheric touch that I really like about this level, particularly if you choose to go for the gold ring, is that when you get to the very end, the thing that you can see in the very distance is the moon. You're at a point in the gun base, the gun fortress, where you're in open outside air, where the only thing that you can see is the glowing moon in the distance, no stars in sight. It's kind of a haunting touch in that regard. I do not know if it was intentional. I don't know if this was just a detail that a developer put in to make the end of the level seem interesting, but it's a really, really, really nice touch. Lethal Highway. Good god, I dislike this level, actually. But similarly to Glyphic Canyon, I do hold a level of respect for it at least. I really like that it's a level in which you pursue an objective instead of go through it at a controlled pace, with the music as fittingly frantic. It feels frantic, the environment around you being consumed by alien growths and black arms that are overpowering the gun soldiers. It's a really nice extension of Westopolis in that the destruction from both sides trying to fend off the other has actually begun to show physical damage, and that physical damage actually affects the level that you're in, with so many roads becoming lethal and explosive if you're not careful, pathways being blocked off because the upper route has been destroyed by, well, explosive fire. The roads becoming even more lethal as you pursue the armoured tank or you gun down the gun soldiers. I'm actually not that big of a fan of the music here, I'll admit. but while I don't really care for it very much, I do kind of admire how groovy and to the point it feels. How it feels very much like a Sonic stage from something like Sonic Adventure. It fits in that Sonic is such a big presence here. Circus Park is, in my opinion, probably the strangest level in the game, for the fact that it's so alike to something you'd see in Heroes or Sonic Adventure 2. Maybe that was intentional, I'm not sure. But I really love how aloof and bizarre this level is in the grand scheme of things. The music is so jovial and bouncy as you skate across the giant theme park over the darkening skies. For how joyous and aloof it does feel, showcasing that maniacal side to Eggman as he's got enough spare time just to make this park while the rest of the world goes to shit, it's pretty interesting, honestly. Death Ruins is a level I have a lot of indifference for, but I like a lot of the aspects about it. Everything about the environment here is purely archaic, with the level design reflecting that, as black arms, growths, mutated plant life and fauna, and sporadic iron bars are blotted and block off parts of the admittedly beautiful ruins. The grunge of the gun presence here and the bloodthirsty black arms mixing in with the natural environment that's being consumed by the second by both sides makes this level feel like a regular Sonic level, only twisted and moulded by the circumstances of this game. The music feels fitting of this too. I can imagine this would be so much more groovy, kind of like Green Forest, if it wasn't in this game, but the genuinely beautiful aspects of the level and the lush nature of a lot of the ruins is ultimately made more dangerous and archaic. The beauty around Shadow is subsumed and corroded by the conflict, making a perfectly interesting tourist spot, probably in the Sonic universe, become a death trap for anyone that's passing through. It has a really nice blend of gunplay and speed here, to be honest, which is probably my favourite thing about it. Lost Impact is gorgeous, though I don't entirely like the level itself. This is one of those levels that a lot of people complain about, and I can get their complaints if you want me to be honest, but that doesn't mean the entire level and all it has is shit. Though, the entire level is tinted in sepia, with the music contrastingly gentle and soft compared to everything else within the game. Everything here is so laden in this depressing, nostalgic undertone. Shadow can progress through the level in whatever route he wishes, but the looming feeling of hopelessness lingers above it all. Maria has been dead for 50 years. No matter what you do here, your choices don't matter. You can't bring a dead person back to life. The only thing you can do here is either kill the artificial chaos or to find Gerald, but the choice in where you go from here is so utterly useless and minimal. It doesn't matter in the long run. To me, this feels like Shadow going through a flashback, his mind mentally rewinding itself to try and remember Maria to keep her memory alive. With everything going on, can you blame Shadow for mentally shuttering himself in the memory of a simpler time? This is one of those levels that, again, set on the Ark, I can outright say looks fucking gorgeous, especially the outside sections, with the gun crane allowing you to blow up nearby meteors as you see the endless infinite dark, the sea of stars around the Ark, reminding you that you're really somewhere special. It reminds you that this place was full of life, hope, dreams, and all of that is just a faded memory now. I've had plenty of moments where I just stand around and look at this level because it feels like a place that's been lived in, but all it is now is just a memory. Final Haunt, in contrast, is so damn groovy. It combines the kind of guitar riffs you'd hear in something like Sonic Heroes with the alien sounds of the black arms that have become so commonplace in this game's OST, but those latter sounds subsume and consume the other part of the track. The atmosphere feels incongruent and incomprehensible, alive, like you're not just going through a level, but an organism, and it's unnerving but incredibly grooving. Not gonna lie, I've always thought that this level sounded like that Macarena song. Like, please tell me that this doesn't sound like it. I am dead serious here. Other than this, there's a air of finality to this level that I quite like. That's a lot different than the other levels in the game, like Lava Shelter, and I like how it contrasts Lost Impact from before, in that it's a level thrust directly into the present, with no time to really process what's around you as time is ticking onward, and that time is of the essence as you do whatever mission. As for the remaining levels, The Doom is a really interesting level in the grand scheme of things, because in context, it's Shadow reliving the worst day of his life, the day Maria died, the day the raid on the Ark happened, 50 years ago. The music here is hauntingly clinical, serene almost, scientific, contrasted by the constant racket of walls being blown up and guns being shot, as Shadow has to relive something this heartbreaking in real time, all in part thanks to Black Doom, mental torture for the poor Hedgehog. You either have the choice to give in to your anger and massacre the gun soldiers, going against the script and natural flow of how things went, flee on your own, or help Maria heal the wounded researchers. I really like this latter objective, actually, because it introduces an unusually strong focus on healing, which, if you've played the game, is quite uncommon, befitting of the clinical sound to this one. The game asks of you to put down the instinctively violent gameplay, become a little bit more methodical, and do the generally right thing, but if you choose to ignore that, bodies will drop around you as Shadow gives into the kind of anger Black Doom wants him to feel, to veer him towards the dark side. You could also interpret the neutral route here as Shadow mentally just blocking everything out, desperately trying to claw his way through something so fucking traumatizing. I really like the fact that in comparison to Lost Impact, which feels so twinged in this longing nostalgia, the Doom uses a similar level layout to that level, but instead lets you experience it with no filters, Black Doom being straight to the point and showing you how everything went down, making the entire thing feel like a thought that nags at Shadow won't go away, intrusive. There's such a potent level of atmosphere here in that you know exactly what's going on. You've been given hints towards what's been going on here all this time. You know exactly how wrong this is, and if you choose the dark path it feels even worse. It actively feels horrible, in my opinion, to choose the dark path, knowing that Shadow is being traumatized in real time and choosing to indulge in the thoughts he's probably had, to take revenge, even made all the more worse by the fact that Shadow doesn't have any of the direct manipulation of Gerald influencing him. If he chooses to go to the dark side here, that's by his own volition. The scientific, clinical feel to this level also makes it feel really claustrophobic, especially when trying to go through all these narrow corridors and then the walls just keep exploding because you have gun on your tail. It's a bit panic-inducing on a first time run, but I really like that detail, to be honest. Airfleet is a really unique level to me in that it actually feels somewhat like an evolution of Eggfleet from Heroes. Instead of it being a sprawling mass of ships that you jump to through the sky, it's a singular one where the route completely changes depending on your objective. You can either go for the goal, you can either alter the path of the President's ship and take it down for the Dark mission, or you can help Tails wipe out the Black Arms and keep the President safe. You're entirely in the presence of Gun here, and it feels fittingly hostile and gritty. You feel like an intruder. The level taking place at sunset just adds this absolutely gorgeous sense of atmosphere to it, in that everything that happens in here will determine if that sunset is the last that humanity will ever see, or if they'll live to see another sunset another day, painting the outside of the ship in these gorgeous yellow hues. The fact that you can see it so few times during the level almost adds to the tension of being inside the ship, in that you're stuck around machines and the military prowess of Gun for most of the level, rarely being able to get a breather even when you do manage to go outside a bit. The insides of this level feel so cramped and grimy and claustrophobic as a result, and I really like that. Black Comet. Oh boy, this level. I actually think it's pure genius, if you want me to be frank, but I also have to sideline my feelings here somewhat, because this is a level that made me feel physically sick and ill as a kid. Something about just how alien, organic it is, the walls, the tendrils, the infinite gloop leading to your death. It just made me feel sick for some reason as a kid. I don't know, I still don't know why. The level is absolutely genius. This pungent atmosphere of malice dances in the air. Toxicity, death in the air as well, as gun soldiers and Black Arms fight each other, except the Black Arms clearly have an advantage here. Cleverly, it actually uses the same motif from Prison Island. Here, compare the two. really clever. It's really clever to me because Prison Island is a representation of what happens when humanity leaves a place to rot, turning it into a toxic wasteland, housing imprisoned Black Arms soldiers. But meanwhile, on the opposite end of the spectrum here, Black Comet is host to a few gun units trying to desperately swarm their way through the level that feels alive, aware of itself, breathing. Honestly, aesthetically, it's just a really gorgeous level, and it fits that toxic, abnormal feel to the Black Arms, that there's this level of unsettling incomprehensibility to these aliens that are the source of the chaos here, and I like that a ton. Mad Matrix rocks. I love this level. Much like the digital circuit, it takes place in a digital realm, but this time being Eggman's. There's something so genuinely cool about playing a level where you're inside Eggman's network, where you're either here to destroy it and fry the Doctor's efforts in the three-way war between Eggman, Gunn and the Black Arms, or you're here to get out. Or you're here to help Espio activate the terminals and snoop around. Honestly, when I think of how the internet could visually look if it was a real place to travel to, I would want it to be like Mad Matrix, this light-speed world where the music is so electronic, groovy, digital, while light speeds past you and the hum of the terminals is enough to make you want to pursue snooping around more. It's such a genuinely gorgeous level to look at, and I really like that it incorporates some level of gunplay for some genuinely clever reasons, other than having to shoot just enemies all the time. It feels so vast and infinite, this level, which I feel really works because most of the level is divided by giant gaps and trails that you need to traverse. I think the music really complements this as well, in that sure, while it's a small musical loop, I think it's befitting of the digital space and the feeling of determination as you make your way through this gigantic cyberspace. Space Gadget is a level I have mixed feelings on, but it's more so because of my lack of experience with the level when I was a kid. This is the level that made me fall in love with space-themed stages as a kid, and the sheer feeling of blasting through an abandoned space colony while Sonic races you to the finish line, all while you navigate different routes to get to the end and manipulate gravity switches, feels exhilarating. This level is stunning as well. To be honest, the music just fits with it so, especially well. With the pursuit of speed as you blitz past the humming, blinking lights of the colony up above, it's just mesmerizing to me. I've always been absolutely in love with this level, just this idea of dashing through the colony that shimmers and twinkles like a star as you keep moving forward, with a really nice level of exploration to it. I like that there's defined alternate routes to this level as well. It's unique in that regard, and that the mechanics like gravity switching and trying to reorientate yourself amidst everything that's going on, those mechanics come into play and make the level either a beautiful romp or a disorientating prance as you attempt to flip the gravity to your own control and get your objectives done. This level does an amazing job at making you feel so utterly tiny in this gigantic abandoned space, and even though there's other depictions of the Ark since this game, I'll be real with you, I don't really vibe with them the same way I do here, because they forget to hone in on the ancient, forgotten feel to the place. I feel like I'm walking on sacred ground when I'm on the Ark in this game, especially in this level. Honestly, I'm going completely off script here for a second, but I've always just had moments growing up where I just stop in place and use the camera to just look around, because it's such a beautiful level, and I can't help but appreciate the beauty of it. Listen, I don't know if anyone's put this level in VR chat already or some other game, but please, can someone do that? Because I would genuinely, make this level one of the places I would go to all the time. Cosmic Fall, by extension, is a really nice, extension of the theming of Space Gadget, but the pure panic of the music as it blares, the Ark falling apart around you while you only have 10 minutes to get the fuck out before it all goes to hell, feels exhilarating in its own right. This is one of those levels where the way the game is somewhat slippery with its physics makes the whole thing 10 times more tense, the music feeling like your doom is imminent. The darker mission of getting the Emerald is one that I particularly like, but I also love the hero mission with Vector, because it makes playing the level even more tense and terrifying, as you have to make some seriously big leaps of faith to achieve your objective, which only adds to how terrifying just the concept of this level is, having to platform from platform to platform, just to try and survive, having to genuinely use Shadow's moveset to avoid just plummeting to your death. Cosmic Fall's music, blaring and repeating as the timer ticks down, is nerve-wracking to say the least, and it's extremely exhilarating, confronting those nerves one-on-one. I like this level better than I do Central City, but I can completely get why someone would prefer Central City over this. But either way, I think this level is clever for just how terrifying it can be, especially if you're falling behind and trying to be precise, because there is no time to just plan out your route here. You've just got to run. You've just got to, like, go. And if you decide not to do that, well, you're screwed. Other than this, I find that the general event tracks in this game serve to fit the respective moods of the routes you take fairly well, being fairly nice interstitial music as well. Even the track for when you boot your route back up to continue it fits this certain investigative vibe the game gives off. You're in charge of Shadow's story, now put the pieces together, essentially. And with talking about the music, it's hard not to ignore the plethora of licensed tracks in this game, which I think is interesting enough. I think they're fitting, though I think of them mostly with indifference. I think they're fine enough tracks, fitting the kind of general tone for the end of the routes you take, but my focus is more on the title track. Probably the most famous track to come out of this game, I Am All of Me. I love this theme so much. Like, it's absolutely fantastic for conveying the complete tonal shift this game decides to take from the rest of the series, that pure grunge and grit, how bleak and dire things are, how Shadow is the absolute arbiter of how things will progress in the story. It genuinely makes me feel excited for the game each time I boot it up. This anthem of raw energy, describing the tone and the feel of the game to an absolute T, pretty much. Honestly, I haven't seen too many people note it, but it's kind of lyrically brilliant as well, describing events related to or about Shadow through some genuinely clever lyricism, at least in my interpretation. I see no, hear no evil, perhaps referring to the phrase see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil. Black writings on the wall, perhaps referring to Gerald Robotnik's mad writings in his cell from Sonic Adventure 2. Which would ultimately be a part of his plan to sink the Ark into Earth, and Shadow's reprogramming. Unleashed a Million Faces, highlighting Gerald's connections to Black Arms, and One by One They Fall could refer to humanity, all the Black Arms. Black-hearted evil, brave-hearted hero, how people see Shadow, how that impression to others defines him, so on. It makes you feel like such an badass this theme, and I fucking love it. It's just unabashedly itself, and I can't help but be in love with that. Literally the definition of I'm cringe but free, though this is not cringe in the slightest to me. Hearing this theme makes me so happy, really, because it immediately tells you you're in for something just so itself, so crazy, you know? If there's something I absolutely adore about this game, it's the shift in style it chooses to undertake. Like, sure, maybe I'm biased for saying this, but I really love the fact that everything about this game is so different compared to the previous Sonic titles. Taking the kind of locales you'd see in past Sonic games like the adventure titles and Heroes to an extent, and fitting them into a grittier visual style overall specific to this game. Previous games provide levels ranging from your standard Sonic fare to places you could think of and imagine living in. Like, look at the end portion of Speed Highway from Sonic Adventure, for example. This place is a vibe. I would shop here. Shadow the Hedgehog, meanwhile, keeps up with this general tradition of the past games, but alters these kind of places, these locales, to suit that grittier style, the feel of this game. A level that comes to mind with this is Death Ruins. I've already talked about it in the previous section before. In previous Sonic games, this would be a giant lush jungle full of ruins that you'd have to scale. The kind of place that you'd run through at high speeds and be genuinely amazed at the sheer scale of it, full of flora and fauna. In this game, however, the grittier, somewhat darker tint of the levels here makes it into these ruins that have began to be corrupted and corroded by the presence of the black arms, unnatural fruits and plants sprouting everywhere as Gunn wages war within the area. There's no time to stop and look at everything to take in the sights, because you're also a target for both sides. Even the somewhat saturated, sickly colours to this level make it feel uneasy and welcoming. Comparing Death Ruins to, say, Green Forest in Sonic Adventure 2 is a matter of night and day. On the opposite side, and when thinking of the more pedestrian locations, Westopolis comes to mind. Buildings and places people probably lived in prior to the invasion have been utterly devastated. Buildings have been entirely shifted off course, roads are cluttered with debris, vehicles have been abandoned, while some areas have been completely consumed by the Black Arms' red fruits, their presence sickly and corrosive compared to the grounded, bleak hues all around you. It's such a harsh contrast to levels like this in the past few Sonic games, where they pride themselves on being so colourful and energetic, like City Escape. In that level, you're blitzing past colourful buildings so vibrant and lively, but in Shadow's case, that's been twisted into such a bleaker interpretation of the trope. I honestly like this about the game, in that these particular tropes of the past titles have been warped and altered, corrupted in a sense, as the real pain and gain of the Black Arms and Gunn and Eggman going all at each other changes these locations into places that you're really just trying to survive in, rather than trying to run past. I think it even shows within how most of the levels, even the more aloof ones like Circus Park, have this distinctly sicklier or weakly saturated colour scheme to them. It gives off a particularly uncanny, unwelcoming edge to the game's levels, in that these levels are supposed to be like Sonic Heroes' even the adventure games, but they've been changed by the game's circumstances. That being said, despite the weakly saturated colour scheme of these levels, the game to me looks stunning in so many places. I've already mentioned Airfleet. Airfleet does come to mind when I'm talking about this gun-operated airship trying to get the president to safety, where you blast through the inner workings of a flying fortress under Black Arms siege, occasionally hopping on platforms adjusted to the sides of the ship, being able to see the settling sun as it showers the outside of the airship in this beautifully golden orange hue. It's always stuck with me, and it feels really foreboding depending on what route you're taking. The Arc levels as well, particularly Space Gadget, comes to mind as well. I freaking love Space Gadget, how it starts off with Shadow plummeting through the air, activating gravity switches and practically skating through the abandoned colony at high speeds. There's such a mesmerizingly pretty aesthetic and style to these levels in particular for me. How the top of the arc shimmers and twinkles overhead of you most of the time like starlight. How gargantuan this place feels, even with its empty halls being occupied by incoming gun robots, or the Black Arms, or whatever their purpose may be here. It just sticks with me. I hadn't played Sonic Adventure 2 when I was a kid, so I had no context as to what the arc meant to Shadow, and what relevancy it had to Shadow's story and his character. So the way the game built up the level for me with this level of intrigue, atmosphere, delicateness, just captured my interest. In general, the arc levels just have a really pretty, calmingly abandoned style feel to them. It really makes you just imagine what living here could have been like, what all these pathways you explore and use could have been in a different time. I tend to say that Sonic games make you feel like a tourist being dragged around at high speeds through these locales of Sonic's choosing to just kind of gawp and gander at the visual style, but it often feels like in this game you're here to explore these places with Shadow taking the pure visual splendor at hand, you know? Which is why visiting levels set within the Black Comet feel even more fascinating to me, because the aesthetic becomes so completely alien and bizarre, with a lot of what you're seeing on screen being nigh on incomprehensible to you, fittingly because the Black Arms are incomprehensible in their motive for most of the paths you choose to take. I always thought that these levels, especially Black Comet, had such a toxic, sickly style to them. Like, just being here looking at your surroundings felt so wrong. Heck, I had plenty of moments when I was younger where I'd imagine what it would be like to touch or grasp at the slime, the goop that you hover aboard for most of the level, with my silly thoughts back then usually being that this stuff would probably kill me, realistically. Something I've come to appreciate about these levels, especially the aforementioned Black Comet, is that they feel so much like exploring networks of caves, or skating through these incomprehensible locations visually, with a lot of that conveyed in even some of the smaller touches, like the inscripted platforms, the tendrils in the walls, the strangely shaped alien shields, guns that suck pillars out of the solid surfaces, etc, etc. It just really helps communicate just how alien these entities truly are, with so much of the level being communicated visually through sickly purples and pinks and magentas. Honestly, for a game that does share some visual similarities to Sonic Heroes, I'm kind of honestly impressed by how different it is in execution. Aside from the way the game generally looks, I actually have quite the appreciation for the little things. Like how even before you play the story and choose a path to take, there's just a lot of visual touches that are there. Even from the smallest details here, everything is just so fittingly drenched in this idea of ambiguity, befitting of Shadow's situation, of the objective of finding the truth and trying to seek it out. Everything in this game is so visually sound and graphically, aesthetically perfect to me, for conveying that theme, that tone, that ambiguity of the game, and the plot and how Shadow's situation will unfold. Firstly, the title screen. It's small details, but how the logo just bursts into the centre of the screen, that grunge guitar riff roaring in the background as pressing a button on the menu results in a gunshot sound, which is both funny and kind of cool. It just creates this absolutely sharp, pivotal tonal shift. Playing this game after any of the previous ones will leave an immediate impression. It's like Whiplash, almost. But when you consider that this is a significantly more introspective, personal, ambiguous story, game overall, it works. It's harsh, blunt, in your face, perhaps a bit edgy, but that's kind of Shadow's style, really. Moving on past that, the visual elements, the graphics themselves in places like the title screen, the accompanying screens after, fit that ambiguity idea even more. Graphical elements in the title screen and accompanying screens are cluttered, grainy, grungy, very indiscernible, most text being fuzzy, arrows in the background pointing to directions, scrolling text that displays different messages that contradict the other, what appears to be Westopolis burning in the background. It's visual clutter, but it works to such a really nice thematic extent. Shadow as a character is a mesh of mystery, a chimera of different plot points and different paths, branches of story waiting to be explored, so the UI and general style of the game, even in the smallest of details, conveys that. Even the tiniest of details like the scrolling text that I mentioned just now, made up of different questions, intentions being displayed, feel uncompromising, intrusive, out of place, conveying Shadow's state of mind. Too much information to decipher, intrusively haunting the Hedgehog. The level progression layout and branching path systems in the level select are cluttered and clumped together, their icons kind of being like the photos you take at a crime scene, with Shadow's literal navigation forcing you to go through them and witness these places, often of which are hazardous and unwelcoming, no place for someone to think, all just chaos. The general level style itself of this game is a harsh contrast to Heroes, as I've mentioned before. Those locales, the environments you're going to find yourself exploring being cities, ruins, sprawling jungles, toxic wastelands, abandoned military posts, so on, even the confines of Shadow's memory now and then. Adding to this, the branching paths, the photos, even the level loading with its red lines, fitting of Shadow, but also like stringing together connections to places, connecting places to each other like a detective figuring out a mystery. It all just fits with this notion of trying to piece things together, to be the detective of the situation and bring these elements together to form one cohesive whole. The strange cohesion of scenarios adds to this, with some plot threads disappearing as certain ones are pursued. Almost like Shadow and the player are attempting to see how all these places fit together, but to little success and avail. Successful paths that have fitting consistency feel like a detective solving a mystery by bringing the scenes of the crimes, the chaos, what Shadow's been told, all together, but there's always something off. Befitting, since there are over 300 plus different combinations of paths that you can take, all of which being one possible truth to who Shadow could be, some more incomprehensible than the others. Even the reminder text in your route is that of Shadow recounting what he knows and showing his current alignment, his current thought process, which fits with the detective discovery narrative. I love how these reminders are always so different depending on the level order you take. They didn't have to make it so different each time, but I genuinely admire the level of effort that they put into that. Just the cute little things, you know? Speaking of paths, I think it's time that we address one of the final things about this game, what happens when you beat a minimum of 10 routes. In spite of the multiple stories and paths you can undertake, to virtually everyone's surprise, Shadow the Hedgehog contains a final last story. Unlocking after you complete the minimum 10 routes, plus their bosses, the last story serves as the canon true end to the game, detailing the definitive truth behind Shadow's past, as well as clearing the mystery surrounding the character, mostly. I have plenty of thoughts about this, to be honest, way too many, but let's save them for after I explain what this path concerns. The last story begins with the familiar noting of the Black Comet's appearance, with the comet just overhead of what remains of Westopolis. Meanwhile, Shadow from within the comet exclaims the familiar line,
"Finally, I've got all the Chaos Emeralds."
Black Doom appears, congratulating the Hedgehog, noting that the ritual can now commence as planned. However, before Shadow can give the emeralds to the leader of the Black Arms, Sonic, Eggman, and company appear, desperately trying to convince Shadow to give them the emeralds instead. Black Doom, however, corrects them, instead revealing that his plan is not to outright annihilate humanity, but to subjugate them with the Black Arms Order, noting their propensity for violence, greed, betrayal, and potential as an energy source, much to Shadow's shock. Shocking everyone, Black Doom swipes the emeralds from Shadow, activating chaos control on the entire comet as it bypasses the Earth's atmosphere and begins to connect itself to the very planet, the emeralds being enough to fuel the comet's presence at full power. Black Doom begins to go into detail about his connections to Shadow, revealing that Gerald needed help to create what would become the ultimate life form, revealing that Shadow is partially of Black Arm's origin. Gerald promised the emeralds to Black Doom if he assisted in giving his genetic material to the project, ultimately revealing that this is why Black Doom reached out to Shadow in the first place, contextualizing why the Black Arms and Shadow look so similar. Regardless, Sonic and company immediately begin to go on the defensive, only to be stopped by nerve gas Black Doom has unleashed. As Shadow struggles to process the information given, Black Arms swarms Sonic and company, intending on devouring them alive. However, at remembering Maria's voice, Shadow snaps out of it, intending to put the past behind him once and for all and destroy Black Doom. Black Doom descends deeper into the comet as Shadow gives chase, being the only one now who can turn the tide. Thus, the last way, the final true level of the game begins. The last way is reminiscent of the other Black Comet base, with the main difference being that the game requires your utmost attention, requiring all of your skill to be put into it. The level is significantly harder, with enemies abundant and asunder, pathways being blocked off entirely as you have to farm your hero gauge for chaos control, blitzing through the comet as Sonic and company keep contact with you in spite of their growing paralysis from the nerve gas. You're given 10 total minutes to get to the inner workings of the comet. I quite like the music here, the feeling of desperation evident as you have to plunder and gun down everything in your path, this time with the truth in tow. Even the less intense tone to it feels like the level itself is now clearer, reflecting Shadow's clarity on matters for a character who's now realised the truth of who he is, seemingly. If you successfully complete this level, the plot continues. Black Doom continues to flaunt his plans as the only option for humanity, boring Shadow enough that the Hedgehog's losing his patience. Black Doom reveals that Shadow was created from his own blood, controlling the Hedgehog through blood control seemingly as the alien taunts him. Meanwhile, as this is occurring, the Chaotix on board the Ark are able to hack into a computer, causing a message from Gerald 50 years in the past to play across all technology on the planet below, including the comet and the gun headquarters. Gerald admits to the Black Arms' involvement in Project Shadow while also being aware that Gun was going to raid the Ark. Gerald explains that the Eclipse cannon, the same one from Sonic Adventure 2, was primarily produced to destroy the Black Comet when it reappears near Earth in 50 years' time. Gerald and Maria explain that Shadow is really mankind's only hope. Shadow, becoming immune to the control that Black Doom has over him, attacks the alien, leaving behind the emeralds in the process as he taunts the Hedgehog. Shadow, putting his past behind him once and for all, uses the Chaos Emeralds to become Super Shadow, going after Black Doom. Welcome to the final boss of the game, Devil Doom. The game's main theme plays as Shadow flies across the bloody Alzaran sky, striking Devil Doom with Chaos Spears as the alien monster throws the debris of Westopolis below at him, rings desperately depleting as Shadow has to strike the monster's eye to get a bit of damage in. I'll be honest, I severely dislike this boss fight for its gameplay. As a kid I absolutely loved it, but playing it nowadays felt kind of cumbersome to me. However, flying around as Super Shadow as I Am All of Me blares in the background, going up against this alien nightmares, the ruins of the earth below orbit Devil Doom like meteors, is fucking cool! Even the name and the design of this boss, Devil Doom, I'm sorry, but that's the coolest fucking thing ever! Anyway, once you beat Devil Doom, he collapses and falls out of the skies as Shadow warps the comet back into space, using Chaos Control, directly in the crosshairs of the Eclipse Cannon as successfully, Gerald's creation obliterates the comet, and seemingly Black Doom with it. Humanity and Sonic and friends celebrate the end of the crisis. Gun vows to pay homage to Gerald, and Shadow doesn't really get that much of a happy ending, to be honest. Shadow stands aboard the Space Colony Ark, looking at a photo of Maria and Gerald, saying one last line as he throws the photo away, walking into parts unknown as the credits play. I'll be honest, as a kid I didn't really understand this ending, why it was so sad, but it hits a certain thematic note when you take into account that the last time Shadow went super, he fell to his assumed death because he just couldn't handle the energy seemingly it took to not only yank the Ark back out of the Earth's orbit with Chaos Control, but also to choose whether after everything to come back to the Ark anyway. Shadow didn't really have that much experience with the Emeralds as Sonic did. In Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic comes back to the Ark after the final fight, Shadow not present, to all of his friends, with the cast reflecting on Shadow and Gerald and everything that just happened, with the final shot inside the Ark being Sonic at the doors of the room, saying a final goodbye to Shadow. In reverse of this, Shadow stands alone on the Ark, walking towards the very doors that Sonic once stood at, saying goodbye to the two people he cared about the most. He's alone here. Maria is gone, Gerald is gone, even Black Doom is gone. There's nobody else now, just him. He has evidence of what his past is, and too much time to figure out how he feels about it. It's an incredibly beautifully satisfying ending, as in Sonic Adventure 2 we said goodbye to Shadow. In Shadow the Hedgehog, Shadow says goodbye to the past that defines him. What else is left now? Just him, the Ark, and the events of the game to mull over. I love it, but god is it fucking depressing. And here's where my mostly positive thoughts on Last Story end. See, I like Last Story enough, but I also have several gripes with it. Firstly, just its existence. Other videos in the past have generally commented on how strange the inclusion of this whole thing is in a game about choice, about how you're supposed to choose what Shadow's story is, if you want a evil Shadow, or a hero Shadow, or a bit of a neutral Shadow. And I echo those sentiments as a fan of this game. I don't really get why this mode is here. I love it. I love the fact that it gives clarity, but I'm confused otherwise on why it's here. And I feel like because of its inclusion, it just downplays several possible interesting plot threads that come up in certain story routes, such as the android possibility, or the gun commander getting revenge. It doesn't particularly fit well, I feel, just with those story routes. Secondly, I feel like it's kinda rushed. Maybe that's just me speculating, but it feels rushed to me. The reason I suggest this is due to how it immediately dumps such a load of exposition details within the route, all of which form such a cohesive and tight explanation for what and who Shadow is that it makes the other routes just redundant by comparison. It makes the android theory from Heroes look fucking stupid, and how The Last Way generally shares its pathing with Final Haunts. Can you see why I think that it's rushed? Speaking of gameplay aspects, Devil Doom. Listen, I absolutely love this boss in terms of a visual standpoint, the musical standpoint. Like, I love the theming behind it. So for example, Black Doom is quite literally revealed here for what he truly is, a monstrous, violent creature who has ruin and destruction orbit him, while Shadow is the light in the dark that's there to destroy him. There's some seriously beautiful thematic parallels and ideas you can pull from this, but then I feel that clashes with the general execution of the boss battle itself, which is basically Metal Overlord from Sonic Heroes but with a dependency on warping away and leaving you to lose your rings and then wonder why you haven't killed the boss yet. Devil Doom feels, in that regard, also extremely rushed, and while in theory this boss battle works, in execution I just don't feel it does. There's other aspects of the whole last story shtick that I also don't particularly like how Eggman reveals that Shadow isn't an android, that he is the real Shadow in this boss fight, like 6 minutes in. You know, instead of putting that somewhere relevant in the time that you spent making this fucking route. Jesus. Personally, I would remove Last Story if I could, instead of trying to strengthen the whole system even more, the pathing system. But let's say that Last Story can't be removed. Let's say that it's absolutely pivotal to the game. How would I suggest trying to fit it better into the game more? I did have an idea about that, or a few ideas. Okay, so here's what I would do. Over the course of your playthroughs, you'll slowly build up case files for each character pivotal in the story. So, Sonic, Black Doom, the Gun Commander, the President, Eggman, all of which being information from canon, that within canon Shadow collects to determine how he feels about a person and who that person is to him in relation to his past and finding the truth. You'll earn information about the characters as you play more routes, with their case files being updated, and once you've played every single level, every single objective, all 10 paths, all bosses, these case files will be complete and the information within will become usable to determine a truth. Within my section on the game's visual design, I mentioned that the lines on the level introduction screens before they begin reminded me of string on a detective's board, connecting the dots together, so let's take that literally. After all levels have been played, all objectives on each level have been played, every boss conquered, the option to start a new playthrough will change to something like Find the Truth. Instead of playing a new playthrough, the level select breaks apart, each level being scattered on the screen, fitting in with the idea of the hero and villain question the game somewhat revolves around. You'll be tasked to find out the truth, connecting levels together manually by the red lines that start each one when you play them. It'll be up to you to create a route that feels logically right, with there being multiple outcomes for this. The game briefly, for a time, turns fully detective, with you having to consult the case files you've accumulated to see what fits your vision of Shadow, if he, to you, is a hero, or if he, to you, is a villain, or something in between. And when you have a cohesive route created using these case files and the levels themselves, the game will ask you, do you accept this path as the truth? Choosing no allows you to go back and edit what you think. If you select yes, it brings you to the last story. In this version of the last story, Shadow meets up with Black Doom, handing him the emeralds in exchange for his past. However, Black Doom reneges on his words, forcing you to chase after him as Black Doom rampages through the pursuit level with all 7 emeralds in hand. The game then plays out as Sonic and friends are on board the comet, forcing Doom to reveal the truth as Shadow catches up to him. The comet being warped down to Westopolis as the city becomes consumed by the Black Arms, Gun, and Eggman's forces desperately trying to fight them off. The last way occurs the same, but the reveal of Gerald's plan to destroy the comet is added in with the notion of knowing that the man also went on to try and use the arc to plummet into the earth before. Shadow comes to terms with his feelings about that, but Maria's wish spurs him on to take Black Doom down. Black Doom, using the emeralds to merge directly with the comet and the Earth itself, becomes a monster feeding off of the land that Maria wanted everyone to be happy on, enraging Shadow in the process, and with using Maria's wish as the motivation to take the emeralds back from Black Doom, Shadow goes super. Here's how I would have changed this boss to be a little bit more fitting. I would have had it revolve around Shadow's moveset significantly more, amped up to the max with the emeralds. Shadow would hop from and blast through broken loop-de-loops as he ascends up the orbiting ruins of Westopolis, throwing chaos spears at Black Doom's weak points to open up the all-seeing eye of the monster, and once there's enough hits in, different ruins of adjacent stages are there for you to choose and hop onto. I feel that by creating a boss battle that feels thematically connected to that initial first level of Westopolis, it puts a nice bow on the whole thing. Shadow yanks Black Doom from the surface of the Earth, leaving the city in ruins as the Hedgehog drags him upward into the Earth's atmosphere. The Chaotix on board the Ark activate the Eclipse Cannon and completely obliterate Black Doom. Shadow lands aboard the Ark, the emeralds given to the Chaotix to deliver back to Sonic and friends as Shadow decides to stay aboard. The cutscenes after play mostly the same, with the exception that Sonic and company plus Eggman's robots begin fixing the damage in Westopolis, helping civilians get around. Gun, instead of paying homage to Gerald, decide to try and live by Maria's words instead, acknowledging the accident aboard the Ark and trying to do better in the future. In a final scene, Shadow reminisces aboard the Ark, with the Gun commander staring down at the planet below with him. The commander offers him a job at Gun, and Shadow mentions he'll think on it. The two discuss Maria and vow to follow her wish, making amends. The game ends on Shadow silently walking into the darkness of the Ark, saying goodbye to his past for good. For the record, this is just an idea. I actually don't mind what we got as is, but it's always interesting to wonder what if, you know. I think that in execution, something like the last story can work, but what we've got is modestly okay, I guess, if not a tad skew with. The reason I propose these changes about getting to the last story is because there's a particular emphasis on characters and roots, themes within this game that often get lost in translation when you pursue one path or the other. So why not keep these aspects? Allow people to make the route they want. An evil Shadow can coexist with the last story. A heroic Shadow can do that too. A neutral one, etc. It doesn't strip choices away from people and their vision of a Shadow, but it also keeps a conclusion in the game that can really allow for a sequel maybe someday. A level of satisfying ambiguity, honing in on the investigative aspects emphasized through both the game and the game's visual design, would in my opinion make for a stronger sense of purpose with the path system and ultimately make a little bit more of an interesting last story, one that doesn't punish people for wanting their Shadow to be the way they want. So, what else is there to discuss left, really? The game's done and dusted. Shadow's story here is over. You've explored all the paths. Oh, wait, what's this on the title menu? A 2-player? Huh, in a Sonic game? Oh, let's check it out. Oh, damn, okay, never mind. Yeah, believe it or not, the 2000 Sonic games had this habit of injecting multiplayer into their games. I actually kind of miss this because it was a lot of insane fun, albeit quite chaotic. Let's get into the specifics. Shadow the Hedgehog's 2-player mode is a PvP experience in which you choose your Shadow of choice, duking it out in one-on-one arenas that are altered variants of levels you'd find within the main game. The goal is simple. As the Shadow of your choice, you've got to take down and kill the opposing player. You've got a choice of 6 Shadows you can choose from. The Shadow we know well, a yellowed variant, and 4 metallic androids. You can select from a simple singular match or go for best of 3. It seems pretty simple and pretty mindless on the surface, to be honest, but once you get into the thick of it, oh my god, this mode is actually really fun. As soon as you begin a match, the Shadow you've chosen to play as and the other player's Shadow start shit-talking each other before the game begins.
You might look like me, but I know you're just a fake. Let's see which one of us is the fake then.
And then once it does, you've got the whole arena to blitz through at high speeds. All the while Radical Highway from Sonic Adventure 2, Shadow's first stage theme, plays. As stated before, the objective of these PvP matches is to, simply put, defeat the other Shadow, proving yourself as the real one. But the methods you have to do that are where the intricacies of this mode shine, actually. While all 6 Shadows you can choose to play as seem normal enough on the surface, each one is tweaked slightly. Original Shadow. This Shadow plays just like the one from the base game, being the most familiar to players. He can pick up weapons, use vehicles, homing attack, and quick hop, as well as utilize the spin dash. Variant Shadow. This Shadow plays identical to the previous, but is slightly more difficult to play because the neon yellow color scheme to his quills makes him very easy to spot. Shadow Android Pink. This Shadow is a metallic white pink with a built-in Gatling gun on its arm. A unique choice since this weapon doesn't actually seem to exist in the base game. As a result, however, they can't use the quick chop or anything from experience. Their homing attack does seem somewhat stronger, however, to make up for this. They can spin dash, and the ammo on their weapon is infinite, but they can't pick up any other weapons. Shadow Android Blue. This Shadow is a metallic white blue with a semi-auto rifle on its arm. Like Pink, it lacks the ability to quick chop, but the homing attack feels stronger with its lock on. They can also spin dash. The ammo on their weapon is infinite, they can't pick up other weapons. Shadow Android Orange. Metallic orange and wielding a grenade launcher on its arm. Like Blue and Pink, it can't quick chop, but it can homing attack and spin dash. From experience, I find that this and the next Shadow's handling to be somewhat heavier, with acceleration much slower to build up, and turning to be kinda heavier. Infinite ammo as well, can't pick up other weapons. Shadow Android Green. Metallic green with an inbuilt bazooka on its arm. Quick chop? Nope. Spin dash? Yes. Heavier handling, and slower acceleration builder with the inability to pick up other weapons. And because each Shadow is so different, it turns what you could shrug off as a mindless mode into something that genuinely requires a level of strategy. Do you choose to play as a regular Shadow and leave yourself more open to attack by having to secure a weapon or a vehicle? Or do you choose to be one of the androids, being equipped with infinite ammo but slightly heavier acceleration? Do you choose to destroy the environment around you and build up Chaos Blast, wrecking your opponent in the process? Do you want to build up Chaos Control so you can easily obliterate your opponent instead? Or do you run and hide, trying to sneak attack? It's little actions and differences like these that make the mode extremely fun, because the pair of you are out for blood, and you're both able to keep pace with each other. Matches can either end within 10 seconds or end up ending in 10 minutes, as you both rain hell upon the other and run after each other. Honestly, I remember vague memories of playing this mode when I was a kid, but I seriously had a lot of fun revisiting it for this video. Let me go over a few fun observations and thoughts. If you choose to play as Shadow Android Orange, you get a ton of range from the grenade launcher you're wielding, with your heavier handling being that you're a bit more like a tank. It looks like it's just a quirk of this particular Shadow, but then you head onto an arena like Lava Shelter. Oh, and then all hell breaks loose. Within the first 5 seconds, you can jump, aim towards the volcanic defense system, activate it, and sink the lower half of the arena into the molten lava below, making it absolute hell for anyone who chose to be a Shadow other than the androids. Suddenly, your Shadow's ability to snipe becomes fucking terrifying for the other Shadow that you're playing against, as they've got to secure a hoverboard, as if they don't, and if they refuse to adapt to the arena, then they will plummet into the arena below or get gunned down to bits. It doesn't help that there's no railings, by the way, so you can easily, panic run away from the other Shadow and then just sink into lava. Also, being the other Shadow and watching as explosives fly across the tiny arena towards you is not only thrilling, but fucking terrifying, which makes the PvP feel less mindless attacking and more like trying to outfox the other Shadow to win. Pursuing the other player is genuinely really thrilling, as you're able to pull off some absolutely bonkers homing attacks that literally trail the other Shadow like a missile. It's fun doing it, but fucking terrifying when you're running for your dear life and you see a ball of white metal or orange pursue you with killing intent. There's something really funny and exhilarating about that, but then being able to turn the tide as soon as you get a gun and raise hell on your pursuer is just not only very funny, but very satisfying as well. Honestly, seeing a Shadow running at you with a gun is both funny and terrifying, especially if you're unprepared, but it's just especially fun to go at each other and try and obliterate the other. When me and my friend were playing this together via Parsec, yes, my connection was fine, I have good internet, I barely had any lag, don't start. We didn't even know that Chaos Blast and Chaos Control were in this mode, so the utter shock when me and my friend managed somehow to get Chaos Blast was wild. We spent a whole match after trying to stress test the mode to see if we could get Chaos Control, but we just couldn't. Honestly, it was just genuinely really fun to skate around for a few PvP sessions as well. With these thoughts, I have a few suggestions for, let's say in a hypothetical world, if this game was remade or remastered and content was added to it. If there was something I loved to genuinely see, it would be having more maps to play on, as there's a ton of locales within the game that would be amazing to adapt into arenas. Imagine playing on the Ark, or in Central City, or maybe in somewhere as wild as Death Ruins. How about other variations of Shadow, like a Black Arms Shadow, or an entirely gun-themed one? How about other modes, like a 2-player race mode, or a mode where you have to complete objectives fast against the other player? Just something like that, but nevertheless, this is a really fun addition to the game, and I really want to play more of it sometime. I had a lot more fun than I thought I would, honestly. Now wake me up when we get a competitive online Shadow tier list. Other than this, what else is left in the game? There is, in fact, one more thing. Expert mode. Once you beat every mission with A ranks, this mode opens up. For anyone who's a fan of this game and how it plays, this is a gauntlet of every level in the game, beefed up in difficulty, with you having to use all that you've learned throughout playing the game to really give it your all. Honestly, the name is accurate. I've never managed to beat Expert Mode even once, because the level design gets insanely tricky and precise later on. Funnily enough, this mode also seems to be that of a simulation Shadow's doing to get into Gun, which is bizarre but also kind of endearing. Strange to get a lore dump in an offhand mode like this. I would gladly recommend this to anyone who wants more Shadow, especially if you want a challenge. Shadow the Hedgehog has an interesting legacy. For a time, there was a significant sect of people who mostly looked at this game in ridicule, animosity, even. The concept of Shadow throwing hands and shooting people being kind of ridiculous. This was certainly one of those games that back in the era of the angry game review, it was easy to pick something as atypical as Shadow up and milk it dry for content. There are genuine criticisms of this game. Hell, I have some of my own. I've expressed that all throughout this video. And I love this game dearly. I love this game dearly enough that I can give it critique and think about what can improve. But despite all of this, there's always been people who love this game. Heck, Shadow is one hell of a popular character, if not the most popular character outside of Sonic himself. With that in mind, over the years, I've noticed that as time passes, Shadow the Hedgehog as a game has begun to garner a lot more love, a lot more appreciation for what it is and what it tried to do, with people being able to appreciate those aspects that make it so different from the rest of the series. That, above anything else, that fact makes me incredibly happy, to be honest. In the time since I began working on this video, a lot has changed. Sonic X Shadow Generations has released, and for the most part, it feels like everything Shadow fans would want nowadays. I'm not gonna spoil the game for you, don't worry if you haven't played it, but as someone who wanted a Shadow the Hedgehog sequel as a kid for so long, a pipe dream, it feels like everything I've ever wanted. I remember being a kid and seeing leaks and mock-ups, quote-unquote, of Shadow the Hedgehog 2, and I desperately wanted it so bad back then. I didn't have much internet access, so I desperately believed there must be some continuation to this game, somehow. Sonic X Shadow Generations fulfills something in me, that long dormant dream of a sequel, in a sense, that's real in here, using the formula Generations and, to an extent, Frontiers created, to make something where, in the end, Shadow gets to move on. And that's where I find myself looking back on Shadow the Hedgehog. A game all about that. It's a game that, from a plot and design standpoint and in every other aspect, is about Shadow trying to move on, but as the game released and people didn't fully understand what it intended, it got dismissed and disregarded over time. But over time, people have come back to it to fully process what it means, because irrespective of what you and I think of it, if you love it, if you hate it, if you're just neutral, whatever, this is an important game. It's an important game for the character, and it began to make the push towards Shadow being able to move on to bigger and better things. Bigger adventures. Sure, for the longest of times he didn't really get that chance to start going on further adventures, but with this game and Sonic X Shadow Generations, I have high hopes, optimism for what's in store next. I'm glad that this game has become more cherished over time, with there being a fair few plethora of fan mods that help not only improve this game, make it look even more gorgeous, or provide a new challenge, but also just allow it to become more accessible to others with the veneer of emulation and the like. I'm glad that people see the genuinely interesting aspects, the concepts, the game on display, and that they give it much more of a chance than people used to. I try not to let childhood bias get in the way of my feelings when it comes to this game. I have a lot of memories with this game as much as I do feelings about it now, and I hope that with this video I can explain all of that to you, just how much this character, this game, means to me, because while it's far from perfect, it is, to me, a beautiful expression of a character who is more than a meme, or edge, or whatever people will water him down to. He, his story, everything he is, this game, is far more important than people give credit for, and I hope I've been able to convey how much not only this game means to me, but just my thoughts about it. I've been wanting to do a video on Shadow for years, but I just never had the impetus or ideas, really, on how I could convey my thoughts. I'm not Again, I'm not here to convince you that this game is a masterpiece. I'm also not here to tell you that this game is the worst thing alive. I'm just here to explain my thoughts, and I'm glad that more than anything I've been given that chance. So, see you next adventure, Shadow. I look forward to what you've got in store next. Thank you for everything. You mean a ton to me.